I thought I was attending a wedding. I never imagined I was the bride. Clara Valenti's world shattered in a cathedral built on secrets. One moment, she stood among strangers in borrowed heels. The next, she became collateral, sold by her father to a man who didn't want a wife. He wanted revenge, and she was the down payment. This is the story of a woman who refused to disappear and a man who built his empire on rage. It's about vows spoken under threat, love forged in captivity, and the dangerous space between punishment and redemption. If you're ready to witness a marriage that began as a weapon and ended as salvation, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin where it all fell apart. The cathedral smelled like lilies and lies. Clara Valenti stood in the back vestibule, her fingers smoothing non-existent wrinkles from a dress she'd never seen before today. Ivory silk, hand-stitched lace, a neckline that dipped just low enough to suggest elegance without crossing into provocation. It fit perfectly, which should have been her first warning. "Stop fidgeting." Her father's voice cut through the organ prelude, filtering through the heavy wooden doors. Vincent Valenti didn't look at her when he spoke. He never did anymore. Clara dropped her hands. "Whose wedding is this again?" "A business associate." His jaw worked like he was chewing glass. "Someone important." That was the second warning. Vincent Valenti dealt in commercial real estate, office parks and strip malls, not the kind of wealth that required cathedral weddings with guest lists that looked like a Fortune 500 directory. Clara had seen the cars in the parking lot. Bentleys, Maseratis, a Rolls-Royce that probably cost more than her college education. "You didn't answer my question," Clara said quietly. "Whose wedding?" Her father's hand tightened on her elbow. Not gentle, not quite bruising. The exact pressure that said, "Shut up and move." "Does it matter?" He finally met her eyes, and Clara saw something she'd never seen in her father before. Fear. Before she could respond, the vestibule doors opened. Not the outer doors leading to the parking lot and freedom. The inner doors. The ones that led to the altar. "It's time." The woman who spoke wore black despite the wedding white everywhere else. She was elegant, cold, and looked at Clara the way someone might appraise a painting they were considering purchasing. "Time for what?" Clara's voice came out smaller than she intended. Her father's grip shifted to her hand. He threaded it through his arm in what might have looked like a tender father-daughter moment, except his fingers were shaking. "Vincent." The woman in black didn't raise her voice. "We had an agreement." "I know." Her father's words barely qualified as sound. "I know." The organ music swelled. Pachelbel's canon in D, the universal sound of brides walking toward their futures. Clara's feet wouldn't move. "Dad, what's happening?" "I'm sorry." He said it so quietly she almost missed it. Then louder, to the woman in black. "She doesn't know." "Then she's about to learn." The woman stepped aside, revealing the cathedral interior beyond. Hundreds of candles, thousands of white roses, pews filled with strangers in expensive suits and designer dresses, all turned toward the back of the church, turned toward her. And at the altar, waiting beside a priest who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, stood a man Clara had never seen before in her life. He was tall, dark-haired, handsome in the way that made you forget to breathe and remember to be afraid in the same instant. His suit probably cost more than her car. He stood with the stillness of someone who'd learned early that power didn't need to announce itself. When his eyes met hers across the length of the cathedral, Clara felt the floor tilt. Those weren't the eyes of a groom waiting for his bride. They were the eyes of a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey. "No!" The word burst out of Clara before she could stop it. "No, Dad, what is this?" Vincent Valenti had built a career on charm and confidence. He'd talked his way into deals that should have crushed him. He'd smiled through audits that should have ended him. But now, faced with his daughter's rising panic, he couldn't even meet her eyes. "You're getting married," he said. Each word sounded like it was being dragged over broken glass. Clara laughed. The sound echoed in the vestibule, sharp and jagged. Are you insane? I don't even know that man." "You will." The woman in black moved between them. Up close, Clara could see she was older than she'd first appeared. 50, maybe. With the kind of beauty that came from bone structure and the confidence that came from never hearing the word no. My son is waiting. Son. Clara's brain tried to process the word, but it wouldn't stick. Nothing about this made sense. She'd woken up this morning in her studio apartment in Midtown, planning to spend Saturday catching up on laundry and maybe finally finishing the art history book she'd been working through. Her father had called at noon saying he needed her to attend a wedding with him. Family obligation, important client. She hadn't thought twice about saying yes. She should have thought 1,000 times. I'm not marrying anyone. Clara yanked her arm free from her father's grip. The ivory silk dress suddenly felt like a costume, like someone else's skin. This is insane. This is payment. The woman's voice didn't rise, but it cut through Clara's panic like a blade. For debts your father incurred, promises he made, consequences he avoided for far too long. Clara spun toward Vincent. What is she talking about? Her father had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. The man who'd always seemed larger than life now looked hollowed out, defeated. I made some bad investments, borrowed from the wrong people. I thought I could fix it, but you couldn't. The woman in black finished his sentence with the efficiency of someone used to cleaning up other people's failures. So we came to an arrangement. Your freedom for hers. Your debt forgiven in exchange for your daughter's hand in marriage to my son. The words landed like physical blows. Clara heard them, understood them individually, but strung together, they made no sense. You sold me? She was looking at her father, but he still wouldn't meet her eyes. You sold me to pay your debts? I protected you. Vincent's voice cracked. You don't understand what these people are capable of, what they would have done to both of us if I hadn't agreed. So instead you gave me to them. Clara's voice was rising, and she didn't care. Let the whole cathedral hear. Let those strangers in their expensive clothes know exactly what kind of transaction they were witnessing. I'm your daughter, not currency. You're both. The woman in black said it without malice, just fact. And right now, you're also running out of time. The ceremony was scheduled to begin 5 minutes ago, and my son doesn't like to be kept waiting. Clara looked at the doors, the ones leading outside, to the parking lot, to her car parked 3 blocks away because the cathedral lot had been full when they arrived. She could run, kick off these heels that fit too perfectly and run. But even as she thought it, she saw the men, 2 of them, flanking the outer doors. Not obvious, not threatening, just present, hands folded, eyes forward, blocking the only exit. This is kidnapping, Clara said. Her voice shook and she hated it. This is illegal. This is business. The woman straightened Clara's veil, a veil Clara didn't remember putting on. When had that happened? And you'll find that in our world, the two are often indistinguishable. The organ music changed, no longer the prelude, the processional, the universal signal that the bride was about to make her entrance. Clara's father took her arm again. This time, she was too numb to pull away. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry, Clara, but if you don't do this, they'll kill us both. They might anyway. But Clara heard the truth in his fear, saw it in the tremor of his hands. Whatever debts he'd accumulated, whatever promises he'd broken, the consequences were real enough to turn him into this hollow, desperate thing. The vestibule doors opened wide. The cathedral stretched before her like a beautiful, terrible tunnel. All those strangers rose to their feet, all those eyes fixed on her. And at the end of that impossible distance, the man who was apparently buying her like property waited with expression so carefully blank it might have been carved from marble. Clara took a step forward because her father's grip left her no choice. Then another. The ivory dress whispered against the stone floor. The veil obscured her peripheral vision, narrowing her world to the path ahead. She cataloged details to keep from screaming: pew decorations, white roses and silver ribbon, guest attire, the women in jewel tones, the men in dark suits that probably had labels she couldn't afford to look at. The flower girl she'd somehow missed noticing before, no more than 6 years old, watching Clara with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. What did that little girl see? A fairy tale bride floating toward her happy ending, or a prisoner walking to her own execution in a beautiful dress. Halfway down the aisle, Clara caught sight of a face she recognized. Her college roommate, Jen. They'd lost touch after graduation, but there she was, seated 5 rows back, looking as confused as Clara felt. When their eyes met, Clara tried to signal with just her expression. "Help me. This isn't what it looks like. I don't know what's happening." But Jen just smiled, gave a small wave, probably thought Clara was having pre-wedding jitters. No one was going to help her. No one even knew she needed help. The man at the altar didn't move as she approached, didn't smile, didn't offer any of the warmth you'd expect from a groom seeing his bride. He simply watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes until her father delivered her to the steps and retreated like a soldier abandoning his post. Up close, the groom was even more devastating and more terrifying. He had the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers or movie screens. Sharp jawline, straight nose, lips that might have been sensual if they weren't pressed into such a hard line. But it was his eyes that trapped her, dark brown, almost black, windows that showed absolutely nothing of whatever was happening behind them. Clara Valenti. He said her name like he was confirming information on a contract. "I'm Luca Moretti." She didn't respond. Couldn't. Her voice had abandoned her somewhere around the moment she realized this nightmare was real. The priest cleared his throat. He was young, nervous, clearly uncomfortable with whatever role he'd been pressured into playing. "Shall we begin?" "Yes." Luca's voice carried the kind of authority that made the single syllable sound like a command from God himself. The ceremony proceeded like a fever dream. The priest rushed through the traditional words, "Dearly beloved, gathered here today, holy matrimony," like he was trying to get through them before someone came to their senses and called the whole thing off. Clara heard none of it. Her entire awareness had narrowed to the man standing beside her. Luca Moretti. Her groom. Her jailer. Her father's debt made flesh. "Do you, Luca Moretti, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." No hesitation. No emotion. Just clinical agreement to terms. "And do you, Clara Valenti, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The cathedral went silent. Even the organ stopped. Every eye in the building focused on her, waiting for the words that would seal this impossible bargain. Clara looked at Luca, really looked at him. And for just a second, she saw something flicker in those carefully controlled eyes. Not warmth, not kindness, but recognition. Like he saw exactly what this cost her, and simply didn't care. Her voice broke on the single syllable. "Say it." Luca's words were barely a whisper, meant only for her. "Or your father dies tonight. Your choice." Not a threat, a promise. Clara heard the difference. She thought about running again, thought about screaming, thought about all the ways this moment would define the rest of her life, however long or short that turned out to be. "I do." The words tasted like ashes. "Then, by the power vested in me," the priest was practically sprinting now, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Luca's hand came up to cup Clara's face. Large, warm, surprisingly gentle for someone who just bought himself a wife. He tilted her chin up, and for a moment Clara thought she saw something almost like regret in his eyes. Then his lips met hers, and the world exploded into camera flashes and polite applause. The kiss lasted exactly 3 seconds. Long enough to seal the vows, short enough to make clear this wasn't about passion or desire. It was about ownership, claim, the final signature on a contract written in her father's cowardice and her own forced compliance. When Luca pulled back, his hand dropped from her face like he'd touched something distasteful. "Smile," he said quietly. "They're watching." Clara turned toward the congregation, toward all these strangers who'd witnessed her sale disguised as ceremony, and pulled her lips into something that might have passed for happiness if you didn't look too closely. The recessional music started. Luca took her arm, and they walked back down the aisle together. Man and wife, husband and prisoner. Every step felt like walking underwater. Clara's mind kept circling the same impossible reality. An hour ago, she'd been free. Now she was married to a stranger who'd purchased her like property and looked at her like she was a problem to be managed. The receiving line happened in a blur. Strangers congratulated her. Strangers kissed her cheek. Strangers called her Mrs. Moretti like the name had always belonged to her. Luca accepted their well wishes with the bare minimum of courtesy, his hand never leaving the small of Clara's back. Possessive, proprietary. A constant reminder that she wasn't going anywhere. When Jen finally reached them, Clara tried again to communicate with her eyes. "This is wrong. This is a mistake. Please see what's happening." But Jen just hugged her tight and whispered, "I can't believe you didn't tell me you were dating someone. He's gorgeous, Clara. You're so lucky." Lucky. Clara felt hysterical laughter building in her chest and swallowed it down before it could escape. The reception was held in the cathedral's adjacent hall, a converted monastery that had been transformed into something out of a luxury magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers, tables set with china that probably cost more per place setting than Clara made in a month. A string quartet playing Vivaldi in the corner. Clara was directed to the head table like a chess piece being moved into position. Luca sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and understated that probably had a name in Italian or French. "You did well, Sin," he said, not looking at her. His attention was on the room, cataloging guests, noting conversations, a general surveying his troops. "I had a gun to my head." Clara kept her voice low, aware of the people nearby. "That tends to motivate cooperation. Metaphorically speaking." Luca's lips quirked in something that might have been amusement on someone with a soul. "I never actually threatened you with a weapon." "You threatened my father." "I stated facts." He finally turned to look at her, and Clara fought the urge to lean back. Those eyes, they really were unnervingly dark. "Your father made promises he couldn't keep, borrowed money he couldn't repay. In my world, that has consequences." "So you bought his daughter?" Clara's hands clenched in her lap, wrinkling the ivory silk. "That seems like an extreme consequence. Steve, I offered him options." Luca reached for his wine glass, swirled the red liquid once before taking a sip. "He chose this one. Because you made the alternative death. I made the alternative honest." He set the glass down with deliberate care. "Your father destroyed something precious to my family. This marriage is his penance, and yours." The words hung between them like a blade. Clara tried to process them, to understand what her father could have possibly done that warranted this kind of revenge, but her mind refused to cooperate. Everything felt surreal, like she was watching this happen to someone else. "What did he destroy?" she asked. Luca didn't answer, just looked at her with those empty eyes and said, "Eat. People are watching, and brides are supposed to look happy." The meal appeared, course after course of food Clara couldn't taste. She moved it around her plate, aware of the eyes on them, aware of Luca's mother watching from a nearby table with an expression of cool satisfaction, aware of her father seated as far from the head table as possible, drinking wine like he could drown his guilt one glass at a time. The toast started after the main course. Luca's best man, a brutally handsome man introduced as Marco, stood and raised his glass. His speech was short, polished, and completely devoid of actual sentiment. To Luca, who always gets what he wants, and to his beautiful bride, who will undoubtedly make him very happy. The way Marco emphasized happy suggested he knew exactly what kind of marriage this was, and found it amusing. Clara's hand shook as she raised her glass for the toast. The champagne tasted like bile. "You're crying." Luca's voice was matter-of-fact. "Stop." Clara hadn't even realized the tears were falling. She wiped at her face quickly, smearing mascara she didn't remember applying. When had someone done her makeup? The dress, the veil, the makeup. All of it prepared before she'd even known she was the bride. This had been planned down to the last detail, while she'd been kept blissfully ignorant until it was too late to run. "I want to leave," she whispered. "Soon." Luca stood, offering her his hand. "First, we dance." The string quartet transitioned smoothly into a waltz. The guests cleared the floor, forming a circle around the space where Clara and Luca would perform their first dance as husband and wife. The symbolism would have been romantic if it weren't so grotesque. Luca pulled her into position with the ease of someone who'd done this before, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body through the layers of expensive fabric between them. "Follow my lead," he said. They moved across the floor in perfect synchronization. Luca was an excellent dancer, smooth, confident, leading her through the steps with absolute control. Clara followed because she had no choice, because fighting would cause a scene, because somewhere in the last few hours she'd learned that compliance was survival, and survival was all she had left. "You're wondering what happens now," Luca said. They turned in a slow circle, and Clara saw the guests watching them with varying expressions: approval, envy, calculation. After the reception, when we're alone, Clara's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on the horror of the ceremony itself that she hadn't thought past it. But of course, this was a wedding, and weddings had wedding nights. "Don't worry," Luca's voice was cold enough to freeze blood. "I'm not interested in consummating this marriage. You're here to serve a purpose, Clara, not to warm my bed." She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt the words like a slap. Being wanted would have been a violation, but being dismissed as not even worth wanting was its own kind of degradation. "What purpose?" Clara asked as they turned again. "Punishment." Luca said it simply, honestly. "You're going to live in my world, wear my name, attend my functions, play the role of devoted wife, and every day your father will see what his choices cost, what he traded for his own survival." "You're using me to torture him." "I'm using you to remind him." They moved through a more complex series of steps, and Clara stumbled. Luca caught her effortlessly, pulling her closer. To anyone watching, it probably looked romantic. "Your father took someone from me, someone I can never get back. So I took his daughter, not to harm you, but to make sure he spends every day knowing what he lost because of what he did." Clara's mind raced. Someone Luca had lost, someone her father had taken. The pieces started clicking into place. This wasn't just about money. This was about revenge. Real, personal, all-consuming revenge. "Who did my father take from you?" she asked. The music swelled toward its crescendo. Luca pulled Clara into a final spin, her dress flaring out in a circle of ivory silk. When they came back together, his hand tightened on her waist. "My sister," he said. "He took my sister." The music ended. The guests applauded. And Clara stood in her husband's arms, finally understanding the truth. She hadn't just been sold to pay a debt. She'd been sold to become a living weapon in a war that had started long before she'd ever heard the name Moretti. Luca released her and stepped back, his expression smoothing into that blank, perfect mask he wore for the watching world. He offered her his arm, and Clara took it because every eye in the room was on them. They made their way back to the head table, accepting more congratulations, more well wishes, more lies dressed up as celebration. Clara smiled until her face hurt, nodded until her neck ached, played the role of happy bride because the alternative was admitting in front of all these powerful strangers that she was trapped in a marriage that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with vengeance. The reception finally, mercifully, wound down. Guests began to leave, pressing envelopes into Luca's hands, probably more money, more gifts, more tributes to the man who'd just acquired himself a wife, like she was a new watch or car. Clara's father approached the head table near the end of the night. He looked smaller than she'd ever seen him, older, broken. "Clara, he started, but she held up a hand. "Don't." The word came out flat, empty. "Just don't." Vincent Valenti stood there for a long moment, maybe hoping she'd change her mind. Forgive him. Tell him she understood that he'd had no choice. But Clara had nothing left to give him. Not forgiveness, not understanding, not even anger. Just a vast echoing emptiness where her old life used to be. Her father left without another word. "It's time to go." Luca appeared at her shoulder. The reception hall was nearly empty now, just a few staff members clearing tables and extinguishing candles. "The car is waiting." Clara followed him outside into a night that felt too normal. Stars overhead, a slight breeze carrying the scent of the roses from the ceremony. Somewhere nearby, someone was laughing. The world hadn't ended. It had just fundamentally rearranged itself into a shape Clara no longer recognized. A black SUV waited at the curb. Luca opened the door and gestured for her to enter. Clara hesitated, and for just a second their eyes met. "You could run," Luca said quietly. "Try to disappear, change your name, start over somewhere far from here." Hope flickered in Clara's chest before she could stop it. "But then I'd find you," Luca continued, "and I'd hurt everyone you care about. Your friends, your former roommates, the barista who knows your coffee order, everyone, until you understood that there is no escape from this. From me. From the choice your father made when he destroyed my family." The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Clara got into the SUV, Luca slid in beside her, and the driver pulled away from the cathedral, away from the last place where Clara Valenti had existed, toward whatever came next for Clara Moretti, the woman who'd been sold, the bride who'd been bought, the weapon in a war she never asked to fight. She watched the city lights blur past the window and wondered if her father had felt like this the moment he'd made his deal with the Morettis. If he'd known, in that instant, that he was trading away something that could never be reclaimed. "Where are we going?" Clara asked. Luca didn't look at her. "Home." But they both knew the word was a lie. Home meant safety, warmth, belonging. What waited for Clara at the end of this drive was a beautiful cage, and the beginning of a marriage that was really a prison sentence for crimes she'd never committed, handed down by a judge who'd decided her suffering was the price for her father's sins. The SUV drove through the night, carrying Clara toward her new life as Mrs. Luca Moretti. And behind them, in the cathedral where it had all begun, the candles finally burned out, leaving nothing but darkness and the fading scent of roses that had celebrated a wedding that was really a funeral for the woman Clara had been, for the future she'd imagined, for the freedom she'd taken for granted right up until the moment it was ripped away. The SUV turned onto a private road. Through the trees, Clara caught glimpses of a house. No, an estate. Sprawling, modern, surrounded by walls and gates that would keep the world out and keep her in. "Welcome home, Mrs. Moretti," Luca said as they pulled through the final gate. Clara said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The estate revealed itself in sections as they drove up the long driveway. First, the manicured grounds lit by strategically placed spotlights, then the modern architecture of glass and steel that somehow managed to look both welcoming and impenetrable. The house sprawled across what must have been several acres, wings extending in different directions like a fortress designed by someone with unlimited money and a pathological need for control. Clara's reflection stared back at her from the SUV window. The veil was gone. She'd pulled it off somewhere during the reception, but the ivory dress remained, a reminder of vows she'd never wanted to speak. She looked like a ghost of someone else's wedding day. The driver stopped at the main entrance. Luca exited smoothly and came around to her door, opening it with the courtesy of a man who'd been raised with old-world manners. Clara almost laughed at the absurdity. He'd bought her like property, but heaven forbid he let her open her own car door. She stepped out, and the night air hit her face, cooler now, carrying the scent of jasmine from somewhere in the darkness. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair pulled into an efficient bun. "Mr. Moretti," the woman's eyes flicked to Clara with assessment. "Welcome home." "Thank you, Anna." Luca placed a hand on Clara's lower back, guiding her forward. "This is my wife, Clara. Please show her to her room." Her room, not their room. Clara felt something twist in her chest, relief mixed with a humiliation she hadn't expected. Being dismissed to separate quarters should have felt like mercy. Instead, it felt like confirmation that she wasn't even worth the pretense of a real marriage. "Of course." Anna's expression remained professionally neutral. "If you'll follow me, Mrs. Moretti." The title sounded foreign. Wrong. Clara wanted to correct her, to say that her name was still Valenti, but the legal documents had already been signed. That ceremony in the cathedral had been theater, but the marriage license was real. She was Clara Moretti now, whether she wanted the name or not. The interior of the house matched the exterior, all clean lines and expensive minimalism. Hardwood floors that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Art on the walls that looked like it belonged in museums. everything perfectly chosen, perfectly placed, perfectly devoid of any warmth or personality. Anna led her up a curved staircase to the second floor, down a hallway lined with closed doors. "The master suite is in the east wing," she explained, gesturing behind them. "Your rooms are here in the west wing." Rooms, plural. Anna opened a door and stepped aside. "I hope you'll find everything to your satisfaction." The space beyond was larger than Clara's entire studio apartment had been. A sitting area with a cream-colored sofa and matching chairs arranged around a fireplace. Beyond that, a bedroom with a king-sized bed dressed in white linens. Through another doorway, Clara glimpsed a bathroom with marble surfaces and a tub that could have doubled as a small pool. It was beautiful, impersonal, and completely terrifying in what it represented. "Your belongings will be delivered tomorrow," Anna continued. "Mr. Moretti arranged for everything from your apartment to be packed and brought here. You'll find appropriate clothing in the closet for tonight and tomorrow. If you need anything, there's a phone on the nightstand. Dial 0 to reach the main house line." Clara walked into the room, her heels sinking into carpet so plush it felt like walking on clouds. The closet Anna had mentioned was actually a walk-in the size of her old bedroom. Inside hung dresses, blouses, slacks, all in her size, all with the tags still attached. Someone had gone shopping for her. Someone had decided what Mrs. Luca Moretti should wear. "Who chose these?" Clara asked. "Mrs. Moretti, Luca's mother." Anna's expression flickered, almost like sympathy. "She has excellent taste." The woman who'd told Clara she was both a daughter and currency. Yes, Clara thought bitterly, excellent taste in everything, including how to dress the woman her son had purchased for revenge. "Is there anything you need right now?" Anna asked. What Clara needed was to wake up from this nightmare. Failing that, she needed answers. "What happened to Luca's sister?" Anna's face went carefully blank. "That's not my story to tell, Mrs. Moretti. Good night." She left, closing the door softly behind her. The click of the latch sounded like a cell door locking. Clara stood in the middle of her beautiful prison and tried to breathe through the panic rising in her chest. This morning, she'd been free. Ordinary. A 26-year-old woman with a boring job in art authentication, a studio apartment she could barely afford, and absolutely no idea that her father had been living on borrowed time purchased with his daughter's future. Now she was married to a stranger who saw her as a tool for vengeance, living in a house that cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Wearing a name that didn't belong to her. The dress suddenly felt too tight. Clara reached behind her back, fumbling for the zipper she couldn't quite reach. After 30 seconds of struggling, she gave up and simply pulled the dress over her head, not caring if she damaged it. Let Luca's mother buy another one. Let them all see exactly how much Clara cared about playing the role they'd assigned her. She left the dress in a heap on the floor and went into the bathroom. Someone had stocked it with everything she could possibly need: towels, robes, toiletries, even makeup in shades that matched her coloring. The attention to detail was suffocating. The shower was large enough for 4 people and had more settings than Clara's old car. She turned on the water as hot as she could stand and stepped under the spray, letting it wash away the makeup, the hairspray, the physical evidence of the wedding. If only it could wash away the marriage itself. She stayed under the water until her skin turned red and the heat started to fade. Then she dried off, pulled on the silk robe hanging on the back of the door, and returned to the bedroom. The clock on the nightstand read 11:47 p.m. Less than 12 hours ago, she'd been free. The thought kept circling her mind like a mantra. 12 hours. That's all it had taken to completely dismantle her life. Clara walked to the window and pulled back the curtains. The grounds stretched out below, lit by those same strategic spotlights. She could see the walls in the distance. High, topped with something that might have been decorative ironwork or might have been security measures, probably both. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, expecting Anna with some forgotten detail about breakfast times or house rules. Instead, Luca stood in the doorway. He changed out of his wedding suit into dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Somehow he looked even more dangerous in casual clothes. "We need to establish some ground rules," he said without preamble. Clara pulled the robe tighter around herself, suddenly aware that she was wearing nothing underneath. "Can't this wait until morning?" "No." Luca stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. The space that had seemed so large moments ago suddenly felt claustrophobic. You'll be expected to attend functions with me, dinners, charity galas, business events. You'll dress appropriately, smile appropriately, and answer questions about our relationship with appropriate enthusiasm. Appropriate. Clara heard the bitterness in her own voice. Is there a script you'd like me to memorize? There's a performance I expect you to deliver. Luca's eyes remained cold. Convincing, consistent. You're madly in love with me. We met through mutual friends 6 months ago. The wedding was rushed because neither of us wanted to wait. That's quite a story. It's the story everyone will believe because the alternative, that I bought you from your father to settle a debt, is too ugly for polite society to acknowledge. He moved closer, and Clara fought the urge to step back. You'll learn the details. Our supposed first date, where I proposed, the romantic lies that make this palatable. And what do I get in return for this performance? Clara asked. You get to keep breathing. Luca said it without inflection. Your father gets to keep his business, what's left of it. Your friends continue their lives without suddenly experiencing mysterious accidents or financial difficulties. So I'm a hostage. You're a wife. He gestured to the room around them. An extremely well-kept wife. You have access to everything in this house except my private office and the East Wing. You have credit cards in your new name, a car at your disposal, though the driver will report everywhere you go. The illusion of freedom with the reality of surveillance. Clara's hands clenched into fists. How generous. It is, actually. Luca's voice hardened. You could be locked in this room 24 hours a day, fed through a slot in the door, kept in conditions that make your current situation look like paradise. Don't mistake my restraint for kindness, Clara. It's strategy. A broken, obviously mistreated wife would raise questions. A happy, well-dressed wife confirms that Luca Moretti has everything under control, including me, especially you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. You forgot this at the reception. He opened the box to reveal a ring, a diamond so large it looked almost obscene, set in platinum that caught the light like captured ice. The engagement ring she'd never received because there had been no engagement. Just a transaction disguised as romance. Put it on, Luca said. Clara's stomach turned. No. Excuse me? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I said no. Clara met his eyes and held them, even though every instinct screamed at her to look away. You can force me to live here. You can threaten my father and my friends. You can make me attend your functions and smile for your business associates, but you cannot make me put on that ring and pretend it means anything other than what it is. A collar dressed up as jewelry. For a long moment, Luca just stared at her. Clara waited for the explosion, the violence, the punishment for daring to defy him. Instead, he laughed. It was a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. You have some spine after all. I was beginning to wonder. He snapped the box shut and slipped it back into his pocket. Fine, no ring, but the rest of the rules stand. You attend events, you play the role. You convince everyone that this marriage is real and that you're grateful to be Mrs. Moretti. And if I refuse, then people start getting hurt. Luca moved to the door. Starting with your friend Jen, the one who was so happy for you at the wedding. It would be a shame if her accounting firm suddenly discovered irregularities in her work, or if her apartment building developed serious structural issues that made it uninhabitable. These things happen, Clara, especially to people who are unfortunate enough to be connected to women who don't understand when they've been given a gift. The threat was so casual it took Clara a moment to process it. You're a monster. I'm a man who keeps his promises. Luca opened the door. And I promised myself that your father would pay for what he did. That promise doesn't require me to be kind to you, just to keep you alive and presentable. Everything else is negotiable based on your behavior. He paused in the doorway, his profile sharp against the hallway light. Breakfast is at 7. Don't be late. The door closed behind him, and Clara was alone again. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The silk robe felt too thin. The room felt too cold. Everything felt wrong in a way that she couldn't articulate. Her phone. The thought struck her suddenly. She'd left it in her purse at the wedding. Maybe it was here. Maybe she could call someone. The police. A lawyer. Anyone who could help her escape this nightmare. But even as she thought it, she knew it was pointless. Luca's family clearly had money and power that extended far beyond what Clara had imagined. The cathedral wedding, the guest list that looked like a who's who of the city's elite, the casual way Luca threatened to destroy her friend's life without any apparent concern that someone might stop him. These weren't people the police could touch. These weren't problems a lawyer could solve. Clara lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in this massive house, Luca was probably doing the same thing. Or maybe he was sleeping peacefully, untroubled by the fact that he'd just imprisoned a stranger in a marriage she never consented to. What had her father done to Luca's sister? The question circled endlessly. What could possibly have warranted this level of revenge? Sleep didn't come. Clara watched the clock count through midnight and into the early morning hours, her mind cycling through everything that had happened, everything Luca had said, trying to find some way out that didn't end with everyone she cared about getting hurt. She must have dozed eventually because the next thing she knew, light was streaming through the windows and Anna was knocking on the door. "Mrs. Moretti, it's 6:30. Mr. Moretti asked me to remind you about breakfast." Clara dragged herself upright, her body aching like she'd been in a fight. In a way, she supposed she had been, and lost. The closet offered up clothes chosen by Luca's mother, a silk blouse in deep green, black slacks, and heels that were somehow exactly her size. Clara dressed mechanically, her hands going through the motions while her mind stayed carefully blank. If she thought too hard about any of this, she'd break. And breaking wasn't an option. She found her way downstairs by following the smell of coffee. The kitchen was enormous, all stainless steel and marble countertops. Luca sat at an island reading something on his tablet, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Clara's car. He looked up when she entered. His eyes tracked over her outfit with the detached assessment of a buyer examining merchandise. "Good," was all he said. Anna appeared with coffee and placed it in front of Clara without being asked. The domestic normalcy of it was surreal. "You have an appointment this afternoon," Luca said, setting down his tablet, "with a stylist. She'll help you understand what's expected in terms of appearance." "I know how to dress myself." "You know how to dress Clara Valenti, the art authentication specialist who lives in a studio apartment in Midtown." Luca's voice remained even. "You need to learn how to dress Clara Moretti, wife of a man whose net worth is measured in 9 figures. The numbers made Clara's head spin. 9 figures. Hundreds of millions, maybe billions. And he'd use some fraction of that wealth to purchase her like she was a car or a piece of real estate. "What exactly is it that you do?" she asked. "To have that kind of money." "I run my family's businesses." Luca returned his attention to his tablet. "Import-export, real estate development, venture capital, various other interests." Various other interests. Clara heard what he wasn't saying. Legal businesses used as cover for illegal ones. Money laundering, organized crime dressed up in expensive suits and corporate shells. "You're in the mafia," she said flatly. Luca's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's a word people use when they want to simplify something complex. My family has connections, influence. We operate in gray areas that make conventional businessmen uncomfortable, but mafia suggests a level of crude violence that doesn't match our operations. You bought a human being to settle a vendetta. That seems pretty crude to me." "That was personal, not business." He stood, smoothing his tie. "And it was necessary. You'll understand why eventually." "Your sister," Clara said. "What happened to her?" Luca's expression went carefully blank. For a moment, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "She died 3 years ago, and your father's negligence is the reason." He picked up his tablet and walked toward the door. "The stylist will be here at 2. Don't disappoint me, Clara. I'd hate for Jen to experience any unfortunate accidents because you couldn't be bothered to show up for an appointment." Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with her coffee and the weight of his casual threat. Anna returned to clear Luca's place. "Can I get you anything else?" "Information," Clara said, "about what happened to Luca's sister." Anna's hand stilled. "That's not something I can discuss. Can't or won't." Both. Anna met her eyes with something that might have been sympathy. Some stories belong to the people who lived them. It's not my place to tell you what Mr. Moretti hasn't chosen to share. She left, and Clara was alone again in this beautiful, terrible house. The morning passed in a haze. Clara explored the house, finding room after room of expensive furniture and art that no one seemed to use. A library with thousands of books organized by subject and author. A home gym that looked like it belonged in a professional facility. A screening room with theater-style seating. All of it perfect and sterile and utterly lacking in anything that resembled a home. The east wing remained locked, just as Luca had said it would be. Clara stood outside the double doors for a long moment, wondering what secrets he kept behind them. At 2 o'clock precisely, the doorbell rang. Anna answered it, and a woman in her 40s swept into the house carrying several large bags and an expression of focused intensity. "You must be Clara." The woman air-kissed both of Clara's cheeks like they were old friends. "I'm Diane. Luca called me personally to help you adjust to your new circumstances. Isn't that sweet?" Sweet wasn't the word Clara would have chosen. Diane sat up in Clara's sitting room, spreading out makeup, hair tools, and what looked like an entire department store's worth of accessories. "Now, you're naturally very pretty, good bone structure, but we need to elevate you, take you from girl next door to trophy wife." "I'm not a trophy," Clara said. Diane laughed like Clara had made a joke. "Of course you are, darling. That's the point. Luca Moretti doesn't do anything halfway, and that includes his choice of wife. You need to look like you belong on his arm at events where a single piece of jewelry costs more than most people make in a year." For the next 3 hours, Diane transformed Clara. New makeup techniques that emphasized her eyes and cheekbones. A different way of styling her hair that looked effortlessly elegant, but probably required an hour of effort. Lessons on posture, on how to walk in heels that were more like architectural achievements than shoes, on the specific way to smile that suggested warmth without actually committing to any genuine emotion. "You're a quick study," Diane said approvingly. "Some women never get this. They always look like they're wearing someone else's skin. But you adapt." "Because I've had practice," Clara thought. Years of watching her father pretend to be more successful than he was. Months of authenticating art for clients who needed someone to confirm their expensive purchases weren't forgeries, while never quite saying it that directly. She'd learned early how to perform whatever role the situation required. She just never thought she'd have to perform being in love with a man who saw her as a weapon. "There's an event next week," Diane said as she packed up her supplies. "A charity gala benefiting children's hospitals. Luca's family is one of the major sponsors. You'll attend with him, and everyone will be watching to see how you handle yourself." "What happens if I don't handle myself well?" Diane's smile didn't waver. "Then Luca will be disappointed. And trust me, darling, disappointing that man is not something you want to do. I've been dressing women in his circle for 15 years. The ones who understand their role and play it well, they thrive. The ones who fight against it?" She shook her head. "They don't last long." After Diane left, Clara stood in front of the full-length mirror in her closet. The woman looking back at her was polished, elegant, and completely unrecognizable. This was Clara Moretti, the trophy wife, the living reminder of Vincent Valenti's failures. She wanted to smash the mirror. Instead, she carefully removed all the makeup Diane had applied and scrubbed her face clean. Luca returned home just before 7. Clara heard his voice in the foyer speaking to Anna about something, then footsteps approaching her wing. He knocked this time, a small courtesy that somehow made everything worse. "Come in," Clara called. Luca entered, still in his suit from this morning. His eyes went to her bare face, her casual clothes, jeans and a t-shirt from the selection his mother had provided, and something flickered across his expression too quickly for Clara to read. "Diane said the appointment went well," he said. "Diane taught me how to be your perfect accessory." Clara kept her voice level. "Congratulations. Your investment is already showing returns." "Is that what you think you are? An investment?" "Aren't I?" Clara stood from where she'd been sitting on the couch. "You spent whatever my father owed you plus the cost of this whole arrangement. The wedding, the house, the clothes, the stylist. All of it calculated to produce a specific return. My father's suffering and your satisfaction." Luca studied her for a long moment. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. And you're exactly as cruel as I thought you were. Good. He moved closer, and Clara held her ground even though everything in her screamed to retreat. Don't mistake me for something I'm not. Don't romanticize the situation or convince yourself that underneath I'm a good man trapped by circumstance. I'm not. I chose this, planned it, executed it, and I'll sleep perfectly well tonight knowing you're locked in this house because of choices I made. Then why are you here? Clara asked. If you're so comfortable with what you've done, why do you keep coming to my room to justify yourself? The question seemed to catch him off guard. For just a second, that careful control slipped, and Clara saw something underneath. Not regret, not quite, but maybe uncertainty, like he hadn't expected her to push back. Dinner's in 30 minutes, he said instead of answering. Join me. Is that a request or a command? Does it matter? Luca turned toward the door. Either way, I expect you in the dining room at 7:30. He left, and Clara stood alone in her beautiful prison, wondering how long she could keep challenging him before he stopped finding it interesting and started finding it intolerable. She changed into one of the dresses from the closet, simple, elegant, the kind of thing that would pass for appropriate dinner wear in a house like this. Then she made her way to the dining room. Luca was already seated at the head of a table large enough for 12. Place settings had been arranged at opposite ends, maximizing the distance between them while still technically sharing a meal. Clara took her seat and waited while Anna served the first course, some kind of soup that probably had a French name and cost more to make than seemed reasonable. They ate in silence for several minutes. Then Luca said, "Tell me about yourself." Clara's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Excuse me? You know about me, my business, my family, my reasons for marrying you. I know nothing about you except that you're Vincent Valenti's daughter and you worked in art authentication." He set down his spoon. "Tell me something true about Clara Valenti." "Why do you care?" "I don't." Luca's honesty was almost refreshing. "But we'll be attending events together. People will ask questions. I should know basic facts about my own wife." "Right. The performance." Clara took a sip of wine that probably cost more per bottle than her monthly rent used to be. "What do you want to know?" "Anything. Everything. Start talking." So Clara talked. She told him about growing up in a house where appearances mattered more than truth, about her mother leaving when she was 12 and never looking back, about putting herself through college because her father's money was always tied up in the next big deal that would save everything, about finding work authenticating art because it combined the art history she loved with the detective work that gave her purpose. Luca listened without interruption. His face revealed nothing, but his eyes tracked every word like he was filing away information for later use. When she finished, he said, "Your mother left because she figured out what your father was, what he'd become." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "Maybe. Or maybe she just got tired of pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't." "And yet you stayed." "I was 12. I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice later," Luca pointed out. "You could have cut contact, built a life completely separate from him. Instead, you remained close enough that when he called about a wedding, you came without question." The observation cut deeper than Clara wanted to admit. "He's still my father. He sold you to save himself." Luca's voice remained even. "That's not love. It's survival instinct dressed up as parental responsibility. And buying someone to use as a tool for revenge, what's that dressed up as?" "Justice." Luca stood, done with his meal even though they'd barely started. "Finish your dinner, Clara. Tomorrow we'll begin preparing for the gala. You'll need to learn names, faces, relationships. The social landscape you're about to navigate is more dangerous than you realize." He left her alone in the dining room with a table full of expensive food she couldn't taste and the echo of his final word. Justice. Clara had spent her career distinguishing real from fake, authentic from forgery. She'd developed an eye for the tiny tells that revealed when something was pretending to be what it wasn't. And everything about Luca Moretti's Justice felt like the most elaborate forgery she'd ever encountered. Beautiful on the surface, carefully constructed. But underneath, where the truth lived, It was just revenge dressed up in prettier language. She finished her wine and went back to her room, already planning for tomorrow. If Luca wanted her to play a role, she'd play it. But she'd also watch, learn, find the cracks in his control. Because everyone made mistakes, even men who thought they were untouchable. And Clara was very good at spotting forgeries, even the ones that looked perfect. The week leading up to the gala passed in a blur of preparation that felt more like military training than wedding bliss. Every morning, Luca appeared at breakfast with a new dossier of information Clara needed to memorize, names and faces of people who would be at the event, their business relationships to the Moretti family, their wives, their scandals, their carefully hidden secrets that everyone in their circle knew, but nobody discussed openly. Marcus Delacroix, Luca said, sliding a photo across the breakfast table on the third morning, imports luxury goods from Europe, married to his second wife, Simone. First wife died in a boating accident that was ruled suspicious but never investigated. He owes my family 7 figures from a deal that went south in 2023. Clara studied the photo. Delacroix looked like a cartoon villain, slicked back hair, 2 white teeth, the kind of tan that came from a bottle or a tanning bed. And I need to know this because when he asks you how we met, you'll smile and tell him the story we've agreed on. And when he mentions his debt or tries to use you to get information about when I might call it in, you'll deflect gracefully and tell me everything he said the moment we're alone. You want me to spy for you. I want you to be useful. Luca's eyes remained on his tablet, scrolling through what looked like financial reports. Otherwise, you're just expensive decoration. Clara bit back the response that rose to her lips. She'd learned over the past few days that arguing with Luca was pointless. He had an answer for everything, delivered with the kind of calm certainty that made you feel stupid for questioning him in the first place. Instead, she memorized Delacroix's face and moved on to the next photo, and the next, and the next. By the time breakfast ended, her head felt stuffed with names and scandals and the intricate web of connections that linked everyone in Luca's world. The afternoons were devoted to other lessons. How to navigate a room full of predators disguised as philanthropists. How to accept compliments that were really insults. How to deliver insults that sounded like compliments. The social warfare of the extremely wealthy, fought with smiles and champagne and perfectly timed observations that could destroy reputations without anyone raising their voice. Diane returned twice more, each time with refinements to Clara's appearance. A slightly different shade of lipstick. A new way to style her hair that looked effortless but required 45 minutes and enough hairspray to shellac a building. Jewelry lessons. When to wear diamonds versus pearls. How much sparkle was confident versus desperate. The subtle messages sent by a woman's choice of earrings. You're representing Luca now, Diane reminded her during the second visit. Every choice you make reflects on him. Every outfit, every accessory, every word you speak in public. You're not just Clara anymore. You're a Moretti. Act accordingly. The words settled over Clara like a weight. She wasn't just Clara anymore. The woman she'd been, the art authenticator with a tiny apartment and a normal life, had been erased as thoroughly as if she'd never existed. In her place stood this polished stranger who knew how to navigate social minefields and could identify the difference between Cartier and Tiffany at 20 paces. The nights were the hardest. Luca rarely joined her for dinner after that first evening, usually sending word through Anna that he was working late or had business to attend to. Clara ate alone in his formal dining room, or, when she couldn't stand the echo of her own thoughts in that cavernous space, in her bedroom, while staring at the walls that were starting to feel more like a cage than a sanctuary. She tried calling her father twice. Both times the calls went to voicemail. She didn't leave messages. What would she even say? That she was fine? That would be a lie. That she hated him? He already knew that. That she forgave him? She couldn't manage that level of dishonesty, even to make them both feel better. On the 5th night, Clara was lying in bed reading one of the books from Luca's library, a first edition of The Great Gatsby that was probably worth more than her car, when she heard voices in the hallway. Male voices. Angry. She set down the book and moved to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. Can't keep doing this. The voice was unfamiliar. Young, strained with an emotion Clara couldn't quite identify. It's been 3 years, Luca. 3 years. At some point, you have to let it go. I'll let it go when justice has been served. Luca's voice was cold enough to freeze water. And justice requires him to understand exactly what he took from us. He understands. You made sure of that when you destroyed his business, when you blacklisted him from every legitimate venture in the city, when you took his daughter and turned her into whatever this is. Clara's breath caught. They were talking about her. His daughter is fine, Luca said. She's living in luxury, wearing clothes worth thousands, eating food most people will never taste. I've been remarkably kind, all things considered. Kind? The other voice rose, then dropped again, like someone had remembered to keep quiet. You bought a human being, Luca. You forced her into a marriage she didn't want. That's not kind. That's sociopathic. Don't lecture me about morality, Marco. Not when you've done worse for less compelling reasons. Marco. Clara remembered the name. Luca's best man. The one who'd given that toast about Luca always getting what he wanted. That was business, Marco said. This is personal. And personal makes you sloppy, makes you vulnerable. What happens when she figures out the truth? What truth? Luca's voice had gone dangerously quiet. That you're not the villain you're pretending to be. That this whole thing, the cold husband, the forced marriage, the elaborate revenge, it's all theater designed to hurt her father, but underneath, you actually feel guilty about what you're doing to her. Silence. Clara pressed closer to the door, her heart hammering. Get out, Luca finally said. Luca, get out. Footsteps retreated down the hallway. A door slammed somewhere in the east wing. Then silence settled over the house like snow, muffling everything. Clara moved away from the door and sat on the edge of her bed, Marco's words echoing in her head. Luca felt guilty? That didn't match anything she'd seen from him. The man who'd bought her like property and threatened her friends didn't have room for guilt. He'd made that perfectly clear. Unless he was lying. Unless the whole cold, calculating persona was exactly what Marco had said, theater designed to maintain distance while he used her to punish her father. The thought was almost more disturbing than believing he was genuinely heartless. At least a heartless man was predictable. A man pretending to be heartless while actually experiencing human emotion? That was a variable Clara hadn't accounted for. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to reconcile this new information with everything she thought she knew about her husband. The morning of the gala arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that seemed designed to mock Clara's internal state. Sunny, warm, birds singing outside her window like the world wasn't completely insane. Diane appeared at noon with 2 assistants and enough equipment to transform Clara into whatever version of herself would survive the evening ahead. The dress had been delivered the day before, a floor-length gown in deep emerald silk that somehow managed to be both modest and devastating. It had cost more than Clara used to make in 6 months. She knew because she'd found the receipt hidden in the garment bag. The transformation took 4 hours. Hair curled and pinned into an elegant updo that showed off her neck and shoulders. Makeup applied with the precision of a painter working on a masterpiece. The dress fitted so perfectly it might have been sewn directly onto her body. Jewelry, diamonds, and emeralds that matched the dress and probably cost more than a small house. When Diane finally stepped back to survey her work, she smiled with genuine satisfaction. Perfect. You look like you were born to this. Clara looked at herself in the full-length mirror and saw a stranger. Beautiful. Polished. Completely unrecognizable as the woman who'd walked into a cathedral a week ago thinking she was attending someone else's wedding. Luca's waiting downstairs, Diane said, packing up her supplies. Don't keep him waiting. Men like that appreciate punctuality. Men like what? Clara wanted to ask. Men who bought wives? Men who built empires on gray area business dealings? Men who pretended to be heartless while feeling guilty about the people they hurt? But Diane was already leaving, her assistants trailing behind with armfuls of equipment. Clara took one last look at her reflection, squared her shoulders, and went to face whatever came next. Luca stood in the foyer wearing a tuxedo that had definitely been custom-made. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread, perfectly groomed, perfectly composed, perfectly everything. When his eyes met hers as she descended the staircase, something flickered in them. Too quick for Clara to identify, too genuine to be completely fake. "You look acceptable," he said. Clara had spent enough time with him now to recognize that as Luca speak for "you look stunning." The fact that he couldn't just say it directly would have been funny if it weren't so sad. "You clean up well yourself," she said, reaching the bottom of the stairs. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "The car's waiting." This time, it wasn't an SUV, but a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than most people's houses. The driver opened the door, and Clara slid into the leather interior, careful not to snag her dress on anything. Luca followed, maintaining the careful distance he always kept between them. They drove in silence through the city streets. Clara watched the neighborhoods change from residential to commercial to the kind of upscale area where even the coffee shops required memberships. The hotel where the gala was being held rose 40 stories into the evening sky, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. "Remember what we discussed," Luca said as they pulled up to the red carpet entrance. "Actual red carpet, with photographers. You're madly in love with me. We're blissfully happy. Any question about our marriage is answered with enthusiasm and carefully rehearsed details. I remember. And if anyone asks about your father, I deflect gracefully and change the subject," Clara finished. "I know my lines, Luca. I've been rehearsing them all week." He looked at her sharply, maybe hearing the bitterness she hadn't quite managed to hide. But before he could respond, the driver was opening the door, and Clara was stepping out into the flash of cameras and the murmur of voices. Luca appeared beside her immediately, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that probably looked protective and possessive to the watching photographers. To Clara, it just felt like a reminder. "I own you. Don't forget." They made their way up the carpet, pausing occasionally for photos. Clara smiled until her face hurt, angling herself the way Diane had taught her, body at a three-quarter turn, chin slightly down, eyes up. The pose that made women look elegant and mysterious, and not at all like hostages in expensive dresses. "Mr. Moretti, who's your beautiful companion?" A reporter thrust a microphone in their direction. "My wife," Luca said with just the right amount of pride. "Clara Moretti. When did you two get married? We had no idea you were even dating." "We prefer to keep our personal life private," Luca said smoothly. "But yes, we recently married. Small ceremony. Family and close friends." "Small ceremony?" Clara almost laughed. If you defined small as several hundred people in a cathedral that looked like it could host a papal coronation. "How did you meet?" the reporter pressed. This was Clara's cue. She leaned into Luca slightly, playing the part of the besotted bride. "Through mutual friends about 6 months ago. He swept me off my feet." "It was mutual," Luca added, looking down at her with an expression that might have passed for affection if you didn't know it was performance. "I knew she was special the moment we met." The lies flowed so easily, Clara almost believed them herself. They posed for a few more photos, answered a few more questions, then moved inside before the reporters could dig any deeper. The ballroom was exactly what Clara had expected. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, tables draped in white linen and set with china that probably cost more per plate than she used to spend on groceries in a month. The crowd was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, all expensive smiles and careful air kisses. "Stay close," Luca murmured as they entered. "And remember, you're representing me now. Everything you do reflects on my family." As if Clara could forget. They made their way through the crowd, Luca stopping every few feet to greet someone or accept congratulations on his recent marriage. Clara smiled and nodded and delivered her lines with the precision of an actor who'd rehearsed the role until it was muscle memory. "Luca, there you are." A woman in her 50s approached, dripping in diamonds and Botox. "And this must be your bride. My dear, you're even more lovely than the photos suggested." "Thank you," Clara said, recognizing the woman from one of Luca's dossiers. Patricia Ashford, real estate mogul, divorced 3 times, ruthless in business and even more ruthless in her personal life. "How did Luca manage to catch someone as young and beautiful as you?" Patricia's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I thought he was married to his work." The comment was designed to put Clara in her place, to suggest she was some kind of trophy acquisition, which, Clara supposed bitterly, she was. "I could ask you the same thing about your current husband," Clara said sweetly. "He must be what, 30 years younger than you?" However did you manage that? Patricia's smile froze. Luca's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Clara's back. Whether in warning or approval, she couldn't tell. She's delightful, Patricia said to Luca, her tone suggesting she meant exactly the opposite. Where have you been hiding her? I haven't been hiding her, Luca said, just keeping her to myself until I was ready to share. They extricated themselves from Patricia and moved deeper into the crowd. Once they were out of earshot, Luca leaned down to whisper, "That was reckless." "That was self-defense," Clara corrected. "She was testing me. If I'd let her get away with that comment, every other woman in this room would have seen me as weak. And now they see you as a threat. Good. Let them." Luca's expression shifted into something Clara couldn't quite read. "You're learning faster than I expected. I'm a quick study when my survival depends on it." They continued their circuit of the room, and Clara deployed the lessons she'd learned. Smile at the right people. Deflect the wrong questions. Make the kind of small talk that conveyed sophistication without revealing anything real. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Marcus Delacroix appeared about an hour into the event, exactly as oily and unpleasant as his photo had suggested. He cornered them near the bar, drink in hand, smile wide and predatory. "Luca, congratulations on the marriage." His eyes slid over Clara in a way that made her skin crawl. "You've done well for yourself." "Thank you, Marcus." Luca's voice remained pleasant, but Clara felt the tension in his body. These two men hated each other. It radiated off them like heat. "And Clara, is it? Tell me, how does a young woman end up married to a man like Luca?" Delacroix's tone suggested the question was friendly curiosity. The look in his eyes suggested he knew exactly how and found it amusing. "The usual way," Clara said. "We met. We fell in love. We got married." "How romantic." Delacroix took a sip of his drink. "And your family approved? I understand your father is Vincent Valenti. Real estate, isn't he? Must be quite the step up for him, having his daughter marry into the Moretti family." There it was, the real question hidden beneath the polite words. "Does your father-in-law owe you money, and can I use that information somehow?" "My father is thrilled for us," Clara said smoothly, as any parent would be when their child finds happiness. "I'm sure he is." Delacroix's smile widened. "Luca, we should talk sometime, about that matter we discussed last year. I think I might be able to settle up sooner than anticipated." "My office will be in touch," Luca said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. Delacroix took the hint and drifted away. Once he was gone, Luca guided Clara toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Well done," he said quietly. "He was fishing for information, and you gave him nothing." "I told you I knew my lines." "You did more than recite lines. You read him. Understood what he was really asking. That's not something that can be taught." Clara looked up at him, surprised by what sounded almost like genuine praise. "I've had practice spotting liars. It was part of my job." "Authenticating art requires reading people as much as reading paintings," Luca said. It wasn't a question. "Every forgery starts with someone trying to convince you it's real. You learn to look for the tells, the inconsistencies, the places where the story doesn't quite add up." Something shifted in Luca's expression. "And what tells have you spotted in me?" The question caught Clara off guard. She studied him, really studied him, taking in the carefully controlled expression, the rigid posture, the way he held himself apart from everyone even when standing in a crowd. "You're lonely," she said finally, "surrounded by hundreds of people who want something from you, and you're completely alone." For just a second, Luca's mask slipped. Clara saw raw surprise in his eyes, followed by something that looked almost like pain. Then the walls came back up, and he was once again the untouchable man who'd bought himself a wife for revenge. "You don't know anything about me," he said. "I know you're pretending to be colder than you actually are," Clara said, remembering Marco's words from the hallway. "I know that whatever my father did to your sister haunts you, and I know that using me to punish him makes you feel guilty, even if you'd never admit it." Luca's jaw tightened. "Where is this coming from?" "I pay attention. It's what I do." Before Luca could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A man had arrived, late, disheveled, and clearly drunk. He was being escorted out by security, but not before he shouted something that made half the ballroom turn to look. "Luca Moretti, you think you can destroy people's lives and get away with it? You think marrying that girl erases what you did?" Security hustled him out, but the damage was done. Hundreds of eyes turned toward Luca and Clara, watching to see how they'd respond. Luca's expression remained completely neutral. "Ignore it," he said quietly. "Smile. Act like it didn't happen." But Clara had recognized the man. Older now, broken by whatever Luca had done to him, but still recognizable from photos she'd seen in her father's office years ago. That was Thomas Chen, her father's former business partner, the man who'd been with him on the deal that had somehow resulted in the death of Luca's sister. The pieces started clicking into place. Her father hadn't acted alone. Whatever negligence had killed Luca's sister, Chen had been part of it. And Luca had already destroyed him. Probably systematically, ruthlessly, the same way he was destroying her father now. "That man," Clara said quietly. "He was involved too, wasn't he? In whatever happened to your sister." Luca's hand tightened on her back. "This isn't the place for this conversation." "When is the place? You've told me nothing, given me no context for why my entire life was upended. I deserve to know what my father did that was so terrible it warranted this." "You deserve nothing," Luca said, his voice hard. "You're here because your father made choices that had consequences. That's all you need to know." They were attracting attention. People nearby were starting to stare, drawn by the tension radiating between them, despite the careful neutrality of their expressions. Clara forced herself to relax, to smile, to lean into Luca like they were having a private moment instead of a terse argument. "Then tell me this," she said quietly. "If you hate me so much, if I'm just a weapon to hurt my father, why do you look at me sometimes like you wish things were different?" Luca went very still. "You're imagining things." "Am I? Because Marco doesn't seem to think so." "You've been eavesdropping." "I've been surviving in a house where I'm kept like a prisoner. Forgive me for using whatever tools I have available to understand my situation." The music shifted to something slower. Couples moved onto the dance floor. Luca pulled Clara with him, guiding her into the traditional waltz position without asking. "If you repeat anything you overheard to anyone," he said as they began to move, "there will be consequences." "You mean more consequences than being forced into marriage and used as a pawn?" "I'm trembling." "You should be." But Luca's voice lacked its usual cold certainty. He sounded almost tired. "This world we're in, my world, it doesn't forgive weakness. It doesn't reward honesty. You show vulnerability, and someone uses it to destroy you." "Is that what happened to your sister? Someone used her to destroy you?" Luca's grip on her tightened almost to the point of pain. "My sister was innocent. She didn't deserve what happened to her, and the men responsible will pay for the rest of their lives. So you're making me pay for my father's sins. How is that justice?" "It's the only justice available to me." Luca's eyes met hers, and for the first time Clara saw real emotion in them. Grief, rage, and underneath it all, a weariness that suggested he was as trapped by this vendetta as she was. "You want to know what happened? Fine. 3 years ago, your father and Thomas Chen were developing a property, residential building, 40 units. They cut corners on the electrical work to save money, hired contractors who weren't qualified, ignored safety inspections. My sister lived in that building." Clara's stomach dropped. She knew where this was going. "There was a fire," Luca continued, his voice carefully controlled. "Started in the walls because of faulty wiring. The fire exits were blocked. The sprinkler system didn't work because Chen had installed a cheaper version that wasn't up to code. My sister was trapped on the 8th floor. She died of smoke inhalation before the firefighters could reach her." The words landed like physical blows. Clara felt them in her chest, in her throat, in the sudden difficulty of drawing breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Your sorry means nothing." Luca's voice had gone flat again. "Your father knew the building wasn't safe. He knew, and he did nothing because fixing it would have cost money he didn't want to spend. So my sister died, 23 years old, brilliant, beautiful, dead because 2 men valued profit over human life." They continued dancing, moving through the steps while Clara's world rearranged itself around this new information. Her father wasn't just in debt. He was guilty of negligent homicide, The kind of crime that should have sent him to prison but probably didn't because he'd had enough money at the time to make it go away. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Clara asked. "Why this instead of letting the legal system handle it?" Luca laughed, and it was the most bitter sound Clara had ever heard. "The police investigated, found no evidence of criminal intent. Your father and Chen settled with the other families who lost people in that fire, paid them off, made it all disappear behind non-disclosure agreements and legal settlements. The legal system failed, so I created my own justice. By destroying Chen and my father. By taking me. By making sure they understand loss the way I understand it. Chen lost everything, his business, his reputation, his family. Your father is losing his business piece by piece. And you?" Luca pulled her closer, and Clara could see the grief raw and open in his eyes. "You're the reminder that keeps him suffering. Every time he sees you with me, he knows what he traded away. His daughter's freedom for his own survival. That's the price of his choices." The music swelled toward its conclusion. Luca spun Clara in a final turn, and she felt tears burning in her eyes. Not for herself. For the young woman who'd died because people like her father valued money over safety. For Luca, trapped in a grief so profound he'd turned himself into a monster to cope with it. For all of them, locked in this cycle of pain and revenge that would never actually bring back what had been lost. The song ended. Applause rippled through the ballroom. Luca released her and stepped back, his expression smoothing back into that neutral mask. "Now you know," he said. "Does it change anything?" Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth he'd been hiding behind all the coldness and control. He was broken, shattered by loss and held together only by rage and the promise of revenge. Using her to hurt her father was the only thing giving him purpose. "It changes everything," she said quietly. "And nothing, you're right to be angry, to want justice, but using me won't bring her back. It won't make you feel better. It'll just create more pain." "Good," Luca said. "Pain is all I have left of her, and I'll make sure your father feels every bit of it." He walked away, leaving Clara standing alone on the edge of the dance floor in her beautiful dress, finally understanding the full scope of the nightmare she'd been sold into. This wasn't just about money or power or even revenge in any simple sense. This was about a brother's grief turned into a weapon. And Clara was that weapon, whether she wanted to be or not. She made it through the rest of the evening on autopilot, smiling and nodding and playing her role while her mind spun through everything Luca had revealed. The drive home passed in silence. Luca stared out his window. Clara stared out hers. The space between them felt vast and unbridgeable. When they arrived at the estate, Luca disappeared into the east wing without a word. Clara went to her own rooms, carefully removing the expensive dress and jewelry, washing off the makeup, taking down her hair. In the mirror, she looked like herself again. Not Clara Moretti, the trophy wife. Just Clara. The woman whose father had caused someone's death and never paid for it. The woman who was now paying for it instead. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thought about Luca's sister, 23 years old. The same age Clara had been when she'd finally felt like her life was coming together. What had she been like? What dreams had died with her in that fire? What kind of person left behind a brother who loved her enough to destroy himself seeking revenge? And what kind of woman was Clara becoming, trapped between understanding why Luca wanted vengeance and knowing that she was the instrument of it? The questions had no answers, just like there was no escape from the beautiful cage she lived in or the marriage that was really a prison sentence. Clara closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but all she could see was fire and smoke and a young woman who died because people like Clara's father had cared more about money than lives. And she understood finally why Luca looked at her sometimes with something that might have been regret, because she was innocent in all of this, and he knew it, and he was using her anyway. That was the truth underneath all the performance and control. Luca Moretti knew exactly what he was doing was wrong. He just didn't care enough to stop. The morning after the gala, Clara woke to find Anna standing in her doorway with an expression that might have been sympathy if the older woman allowed herself such luxuries. "Mr. Moretti asked me to inform you that he'll be away on business for the next few days," Anna said. "He left early this morning." Clara sat up, processing this information. After everything that had been revealed last night, Luca had simply disappeared. No explanation, no conversation, just gone. Did he say where he was going? He doesn't share his itinerary with me, Mrs. Moretti. Anna set down a breakfast tray that Clara hadn't asked for. Is there anything you need while he's away? What Clara needed was answers, context, some kind of roadmap for navigating a situation that grew more complicated every day. But Anna couldn't provide any of those things. No, thank you, Clara said. After Anna left, Clara picked at the breakfast without tasting it. Her mind kept circling back to the previous night. The fire, Luca's sister, her father's negligence. The weight of that knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, making it hard to breathe. She'd been angry at her father for selling her, furious at being used as payment for his debts. But this was different. This was understanding that she was paying for something far worse than financial irresponsibility. Her father had killed someone through his greed and carelessness. And Clara was the price he was being charged. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her career authenticating art, determining what was real and what was fake. Now she was living a lie, pretending to be a happily married woman while serving as a tool for revenge. The forgery she couldn't escape was her own life. Clara spent the day exploring parts of the estate she'd avoided before. The grounds were extensive, gardens that looked professionally maintained, a pool she hadn't known existed, a tennis court that probably hadn't been used in years. All of it beautiful and empty and utterly wasted on a man who apparently never took time to enjoy any of it. She found herself standing outside the east wing again. The locked doors. Luca's private space. The one place in this entire house she wasn't allowed to enter. Clara tried the handle, knowing it would be locked, but needing to confirm it anyway. It didn't budge. He keeps that wing secured, a voice said behind her. Clara spun around to find Marco standing there. Luca's best man, the one who'd argued with him in the hallway about guilt and vulnerability. I didn't hear you come in, Clara said. I have a key. Marco held it up, then tucked it back into his pocket. Luca asked me to check on something while he's gone. Didn't expect to find you trying to break into his private quarters. I wasn't breaking in, just checking. Checking what? Whether he trusts you enough to leave it unlocked? Marco's expression was sympathetic but honest. He doesn't, and won't. That wing is where he keeps everything that matters to him. Clara studied Marco. He was younger than Luca, maybe early 30s, with the kind of easy confidence that suggested he'd been born into this world of wealth and power rather than fighting his way into it. His dark eyes held intelligence and something else. Concern, maybe. You're his best friend, Clara said. I'm his cousin. Best friend is probably too strong. Luca doesn't really do friendship. But you care about him. Unfortunately, Marco leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Look, I know what he's doing to you. I know it's wrong. I've told him as much. But Luca doesn't listen to anyone when he's in revenge mode. How long has he been in revenge mode? 3 years, since the fire. Marco's expression darkened. Sophia, that was his sister. She was everything to him. Their parents died when Luca was 22 and she was 16. He raised her, put her through college, watched her build a life. When she died because of your father's negligence, something in him broke. He became obsessed with making the people responsible pay. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the house. He told me about the fire last night, about what my father did. Then you understand why he can't let it go. Understanding doesn't make it right. I didn't kill his sister. I didn't even know about the building or the fire until yesterday. But I'm the one being punished. You're the leverage, Marco corrected gently. Luca's version of justice requires your father to suffer the way he's suffered. And what makes a parent suffer more than seeing their child trapped in a situation they can't escape? Except my father doesn't care enough about me for this to work the way Luca thinks it will. The words came out more bitter than Clara intended. He sold me to save himself. That's not love. That's cowardice. Marco was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Your father has called this house 17 times in the past week. Anna's been instructed not to put him through. He shows up at Luca's office building every day and is turned away by security. Whatever else he is, he's not indifferent to what's happening to you. The information hit Clara like a physical blow. Her father was trying to reach her? After everything that had happened, he was still trying? Why hasn't anyone told me this? Because Luca doesn't want you to know. Doesn't want you to soften toward your father or start questioning whether this revenge is justified. Marco pushed off from the wall. I probably shouldn't have said anything, but you seem like you could use an ally in this house. Someone who'll tell you the truth instead of whatever version Luca's crafted. Why would you do that? You're his family. Which is exactly why I can see what this is doing to him. Revenge isn't healing him, it's consuming him, turning him into someone I barely recognize. Marco looked at the locked doors of the East Wing. Sophia wouldn't want this. She'd hate seeing what he's become in her name. Did you know her? She was my cousin too. Brilliant, funny, kind. Everything Luca isn't anymore. Marco's voice carried real grief. She wanted to be an architect, design buildings that would last generations. Instead, she died in a building that was designed to maximize profit at the expense of safety. The irony would be funny if it weren't so tragic. Clara thought about the young woman who'd wanted to create beautiful, lasting things and had died because people like her father had cut corners. The waste of it, the absolute senseless waste. What was she like? Clara asked. Really like? Marco smiled, but it was sad around the edges. She was the person who could make Luca laugh, the only one who could talk him out of his darker moods. She believed in people even when they didn't deserve it. Luca called her naive. She called him cynical. They balanced each other. And when she died, he lost his balance. Completely. Marco looked at Clara with an expression that suggested he was seeing her clearly for the first time. You know what's interesting? You remind me of her sometimes. The way you push back against Luca. Refuse to just accept what he tells you. Sophia did that too. I doubt Luca sees the resemblance. Maybe not consciously, but I think part of why he looks so uncomfortable around you is because you're making him remember what it was like to have someone in his life who challenged him, who didn't just agree with everything he said out of fear or obligation. The observation settled over Clara like a cloak. She thought about the moments when Luca's mask had slipped, the times he'd looked at her like he was seeing someone else. Maybe Marco was right. Maybe she reminded him of the sister he'd lost, and that made using her for revenge even more complicated than he'd anticipated. He's not going to let me go, Clara said. It wasn't a question. No, not until he's satisfied that your father has suffered enough, and I'm not sure what that looks like or if it's even possible. Marco pulled out his phone, glanced at it, then back at Clara. I have to go. But Clara, be careful. Luca's unpredictable right now. Angry. And the angrier he gets, the more dangerous this situation becomes. He left through the front entrance, and Clara was alone again in the beautiful, empty house. She spent the afternoon in the library, pulling books off shelves at random and trying to lose herself in other people's stories. Anything to escape her own for a few hours. She found first editions, rare manuscripts, books in languages she couldn't read, all of it curated by someone with sophisticated taste and unlimited resources. On a bottom shelf, almost hidden behind a row of leather-bound classics, Clara found a photo album. She pulled it out and opened it before she could second-guess the invasion of privacy. The first photo showed a much younger Luca, maybe 19 or 20, with his arm around a teenage girl with dark hair and his same striking features. They were laughing at something off-camera. Both of them looked happy in a way that seemed almost impossible given the Luca Clara knew. She turned the pages slowly, watching Sophia grow up in frozen moments. Sophia at her high school graduation, Luca standing beside her in a suit that didn't quite fit, Sophia in front of a university building holding up an acceptance letter, Sophia at what looked like her 21st birthday party, surrounded by friends and wearing a smile that could light up rooms. And in every photo where they appeared together, Luca looked at his sister with an expression of such profound love and pride that Clara felt her throat tighten. This was what he'd lost. Not just a sister, but the only person who'd made him happy. The only person who'd seen past the walls he built and loved him anyway. Clara closed the album and put it back exactly where she'd found it. She felt like she'd intruded on something sacred, a grief so private and profound that Luca kept it locked away in photo albums hidden behind books nobody read. The next 2 days passed in similar fashion. Clara explored the house and grounds, ate meals alone, read books from the library, tried not to think about where Luca was, or what he was doing, or whether he'd ever look at her without seeing a tool for revenge. Anna went about her duties with professional efficiency, neither friendly nor cold. The other staff Clara occasionally glimpsed, a gardener, a housekeeper, a cook who prepared meals Clara barely touched, kept their distance. She was Mrs. Moretti, the mysterious bride who'd appeared from nowhere. They were paid to serve her, not befriend her. On the third evening, Clara was in her room when she heard a car in the driveway. She moved to the window and watched Luca emerge from the back of the sedan. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion in the way he moved. He disappeared into the house, and Clara waited. Part of her expected him to come to her room, to check on her or continue the conversation they'd started at the gala. But an hour passed, then two, and he never appeared. She found him just before midnight in the library. He was sitting in one of the leather chairs near the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at flames that cast dancing shadows across his face. "You found the photo album," he said without looking at her. Clara froze in the doorway. "How did you know?" "Because it's not exactly where I left it. Close, but not exact." Luca finally turned to look at her. "You're careful, but not careful enough." "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "She would have liked you," Luca interrupted. "Sophia, if you'd met under different circumstances, she would have liked you." Clara moved into the room slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "Marco said I remind him of her sometimes. Marco talks too much." But Luca didn't sound angry, just tired. "You do, though. Remind me of her. The way you refuse to just accept things. The way you look at me like you can see past all the walls I've built. It's uncomfortable." "Good," Clara said, surprising herself. "You should be uncomfortable. You should feel something other than cold calculation and rage." "I feel plenty." Luca took a drink of his whiskey. "I just don't let it control me. It already controls you. This entire revenge plan, it's all emotion dressed up as logic. You're not pursuing justice. You're pursuing pain because you're in pain, and misery loves company." Luca's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Clara sat in the chair across from him, maintaining eye contact even though every instinct told her to look away. "You're using me to hurt my father, but you're also hurting yourself. Every time you see me, you're reminded of what you've become. Someone who uses innocent people to settle scores. Someone your sister would be ashamed of." The words landed like a slap. Luca set down his glass with deliberate care, his movements controlled in a way that suggested violence barely restrained. "You should stop talking," he said quietly. "Why? Because I'm right? Because you know Sophia wouldn't want this? Because you're pushing me towards something neither of us will enjoy." "What, more threats? More reminders that you own me and can destroy anyone I care about? I've heard it all before, Luca. It's lost its impact." Luca stood abruptly, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. He grabbed Clara's arms and pulled her to her feet, holding her close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "You think you know me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You've been in my house for 2 weeks, and you think you understand what I'm capable of. But you don't. You have no idea what I've done to the people who hurt my sister, what I'm still doing to them." "Then tell me," Clara challenged. "Tell me what you did to Thomas Chen. Tell me exactly how far you're willing to go for revenge." For a long moment, Luca just stared at her. His grip on her arms was tight enough to bruise, and Clara could feel the barely controlled fury radiating off him. This was the real Luca Moretti, not the cold businessman or the calculating husband. This was the broken man underneath, held together by rage and grief. Then something shifted in his expression. The anger drained away, replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. "I destroyed him," Luca said quietly. "Chen. I bought his company out from under him, blacklisted him from every legitimate business opportunity in 3 states. Had the building inspector who'd signed off on that faulty building reopened, investigate his other properties? Every violation, every corner he'd ever cut. I made sure it all came to light. He lost everything. His business, his reputation, his family left him. Last I heard, he's living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, working retail." "And my father?" "I'm taking it slower with Vincent. Wanted him to watch it happen. Every deal that falls through, every investor who suddenly backs out, every door that closes in his face. I want him to know exactly who's responsible and why." Oh, Luca's hands loosened on her arms but didn't release her. "And I want him to see you, living in my house, wearing my name, trapped in a marriage you didn't choose. I want him to feel what I felt, powerless to save someone you love from suffering." Claire's heart was pounding, but she forced herself to stay calm, to think through what he was really saying. "Except my father doesn't love me the way you loved Sophia," she said. "He sold me, traded my freedom for his survival. Whatever guilt he feels, it's not the kind of agony you're hoping for." "Maybe not yet." Luca finally released her and stepped back. "But it will be, when he realizes what kind of life you're living, what kind of man I actually am when I'm not performing for cameras or business associates." "And what kind of man is that?" Luca turned back to the fireplace, his shoulders rigid. "The kind who does whatever necessary to achieve his goals, who doesn't let empathy or morality get in the way of results, who learned a long time ago that showing weakness is the fastest way to get destroyed." Clara moved to stand beside him, both of them watching the flames. "Your sister made you weak?" "She made me human," Luca corrected. "And humans can be hurt. I won't make that mistake again." "So you've decided to just be a monster instead? That's your solution?" "It's safer. It's lonely." Clara looked at his reflection in the glass of a nearby window. "Marco's worried about you. I suspect your mother is too, though she hides it better. And somewhere underneath all this armor, I think you're worried about yourself, about what you're becoming." Luca laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You think you can save me? Like this is some romance novel where the innocent bride reforms the damaged hero through the power of love." "I think you're drowning in grief and calling it justice," Clara said. "And I think part of you knows it. That's why you look guilty sometimes when you look at me, why you can't quite commit to being as cruel as you pretend to be. I bought you like property, forced you into marriage, used you as a weapon to torture your father. How much crueler would I need to be for you to accept that I'm exactly what I appear to be?" "You could have consummated the marriage," Clara said bluntly, "used me sexually as well as emotionally, but you haven't. You give me my own space, my own rooms. You threaten my friends but haven't actually hurt them. You're performing cruelty while maintaining boundaries that suggest you're not as far gone as you want everyone to believe." Luca turned to face her fully. "Those boundaries exist because crossing them would make me indistinguishable from the men I despise. Not because I have any particular care for you." "I don't believe you." "Then you're a fool." "Maybe," Clara held his gaze. "Or maybe I'm just better at seeing through forgeries than you are at creating them." The silence that fell between them was charged with something Clara couldn't name. Not attraction. That would be absurd given their circumstances. But recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement that they were both trapped in a situation neither of them knew how to escape. "I leave for Europe tomorrow," Luca said finally. "Business meetings. I'll be gone for at least a week. Maybe longer." "Running away?" "Maintaining the empire that pays for this beautiful cage you're living in." Luca moved toward the door, then paused. "While I'm gone, stay out of the East Wing. Don't test the boundaries, Clara. I won't be here to stop the consequences if you do." He left, and Clara stood alone in the library with the fire dying down and the shadows growing longer. She spent the night in her room, unable to sleep, her mind spinning through everything that had been said. The admission that Luca's cruelty was at least partially performance. The suggestion that he saw his sister in her. The revelation that he was struggling with what he'd become even as he continued down the path of revenge. In the morning, Clara watched from her window as Luca's car pulled away. He didn't look back at the house, didn't acknowledge her even though she was fairly certain he knew she was watching. The week that followed was the longest of Clara's life. She filled the days with exploration and reading and long walks around the grounds. She talked to Anna occasionally, carefully probing for information about Luca without being obvious about it. She called Jen twice, having finally been given limited phone privileges, and maintained the fiction that everything was wonderful in her new marriage. "You sound different," Jen said during the second call. "Sad, maybe?" "Just adjusting," Clara lied. "It's a big change." "But you're happy? Luca treats you well?" Clara thought about all the ways to answer that question honestly. "He's complicated, but we're figuring it out." More lies, more performance. Clara was getting disturbingly good at both. On the 6th day of Luca's absence, Clara made a decision. She was tired of accepting the limitations placed on her, tired of being a passive victim in her own life. If she was going to survive this situation, really survive it, not just endure it, she needed to understand Luca completely. And that meant going into the East Wing. She waited until evening when Anna had left for the day and the other staff had retired to their own quarters. Then she went to the locked doors and tried the handle one more time, knowing it was futile but needing to check. Still locked. Clara examined the doors more closely. Expensive wood, secure locks. But the craftsmanship was old. This house had been built decades ago, before modern security systems, which meant the locks might be pickable if she had the right tools and the patience to try. She'd learned lockpicking from an old mentor who taught her art authentication. His logic had been simple. If you're going to authenticate pieces stored in private collections, you need to know how security works. The skill had come in handy exactly once before, when she'd needed to access a locked drawer to verify a painting's provenance. Now it might come in handy for an entirely different reason. Clara went to the library and found what she needed, a letter opener and a paperclip. Not ideal tools, but they would work if she was patient. It took 40 minutes of careful manipulation before she heard the click of the lock releasing. Clara's hands were shaking as she pushed open the door. The East Wing was different from the rest of the house. Where the other areas were all modern minimalism, this space felt personal, lived in. The walls were painted a warm gray, artwork that actually meant something rather than just expensive pieces chosen by a designer. Furniture that looked comfortable instead of just aesthetically perfect. Clara moved through the space carefully, aware that she was trespassing in the most fundamental way. The sitting room led to a home office. Beyond that, a bedroom that was clearly Luca's, and at the end of the hallway, a door that stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open and stepped into what was clearly Sophia's room. It had been preserved exactly as she must have left it. Textbooks on the desk, architectural drawings pinned to a corkboard on the wall, photos of friends and family scattered across a dresser. The bed made with care, pillows arranged just so. This was Luca's shrine to his sister, the place where he kept her memory alive by keeping everything exactly as it had been before the fire. Clara moved slowly through the room, taking in the details. A half-finished sketch of a building that would never be built. A coffee mug with a university logo still sitting on the desk, like Sophia might return any moment to finish the cold coffee inside. A sweater draped over the desk chair. On the nightstand, Clara found a framed photo, Luca and Sophia together at what looked like her college graduation, both of them smiling with genuine joy. This was before the fire. Before Sophia's death had turned Luca into the man who'd bought himself a wife for revenge. Clara picked up the frame and studied Sophia's face. Pretty, young, full of promise and potential that had been snuffed out by greed and negligence. I said to stay out of the East Wing. The voice behind her made Clara jump. She spun around to find Luca standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. You're supposed to be in Europe, Clara said. I came back early. Luca stepped into the room, his eyes moving from Clara to the photo in her hands to the space she'd invaded. Put that down. Clara set the frame back on the nightstand carefully. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No, you shouldn't have. Luca's voice was quiet, but Clara heard the fury underneath. This room is off limits. The entire wing is off limits. I made that extremely clear. I know, I just needed to understand. Understand what? Luca crossed the space between them in 3 strides. Why I keep my dead sister's room exactly as she left it. Why I come in here sometimes and pretend she's just out with friends and will be home soon. What exactly did you think breaking into my private space would help you understand? Clara met his eyes and saw raw pain underneath the anger. That you're not a monster. That underneath all the revenge and cruelty, you're just a person who lost someone you loved and doesn't know how to cope with it. Get out. Luca, get out. His hands were clenched into fists. Before I do something we'll both regret. Clara moved toward the door, but she couldn't leave it like this. She turned back and said, she wouldn't want you to destroy yourself in her name. Whatever else she was, I'm guessing she loved you too much to want this for you. You don't know anything about what she'd want, Luca said, but his voice cracked on the words. Clara left before he could see the tears in her own eyes. She hurried back to her wing, her heart pounding, knowing she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. An hour later, there was a knock on her door. Clara opened it, expecting Anna or maybe Marco. Instead, Luca stood there, looking like he'd aged 10 years since she'd seen him in Sophia's room. "We need to talk," he said. Clara stepped aside and he entered her sitting room. They stood facing each other, the tension between them thick enough to cut. "What you said in Sophia's room," Luca started. "About her not wanting this. You're probably right. She was better than me. Better than this whole world of revenge and violence and using people as weapons. Then why are you doing it?" "Because I promised her." Luca's voice broke. "The last time I saw her. It was the night before the fire. We had dinner. She told me about a new project she was working on, a community center in a low-income neighborhood. She was so excited about it. Making a difference, she said. Building something that would last." He paused, struggling with emotion Clara had never seen from him before. "I told her I was proud of her," he continued, "that she was going to change the world, and she laughed and said that was the plan. When she left that night, I called after her, told her to be careful. She said she always was. 24 hours later, she was dead." Tears were streaming down Luca's face now. He made no effort to wipe them away. "I swore at her funeral that I'd make the people responsible pay, that they'd understand what they'd taken from the world when they cut corners on that building. That's the promise I can't break, Clara. It's all I have left of her." Clara felt her own tears falling. For Sophia. For Luca. For her father and all the people whose lives had been shattered by his negligence. "Revenge won't bring her back," she said gently. "I know." Luca looked at her with eyes full of grief and something else. Resignation, maybe. "But it's the only thing I know how to do. The only way I know how to channel this pain into something that feels like action instead of just drowning in loss. And when you've destroyed my father completely, when he's lost everything the way Thomas Chen did, will that be enough? Will you finally be able to let her go?" Luca was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't know. And that terrifies me more than anything else about this situation." He turned to leave, but Clara reached out and caught his arm. "Wait." Luca looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. "You don't have to do this alone," Clara said. "Carry this grief alone. I know you see me as the enemy, your father's daughter, the tool for your revenge, but I'm also just a person who understands loss. Who knows what it feels like to have your life torn apart by circumstances you can't control?" "What are you suggesting?" Clara wasn't entirely sure herself, but standing there in her beautiful prison with this broken man who'd trapped her in a marriage built on revenge, she knew something had to change. They couldn't keep going the way they had been. It would destroy them both. "I'm suggesting we stop pretending," she said. "Stop performing for each other. You don't have to be the heartless villain. I don't have to be the helpless victim. Maybe we could just be two people trying to survive an impossible situation." Luca studied her face for a long moment. Then he said, "And if I can't do that? If the revenge is too deeply embedded in who I've become? Then at least we'll both know the truth. That this marriage really is just a weapon, that there's no possibility of it ever becoming anything more." "There isn't," Luca said, but he didn't sound certain. "Prove it," Clara challenged. "Stop running away. Stop hiding in the East Wing or disappearing on business trips. Stay here. Let me see the real you instead of the performance, and maybe I'll actually believe that you're as heartless as you claim to be." The challenge hung between them. Luca's expression shifted through a dozen emotions too quickly for Clara to track. Finally, he nodded once. "Fine. No more performing, starting now." He met her eyes. "I hate what you represent. Every time I look at you, I see your father and what he took from me. But I also see someone who's being punished for crimes they didn't commit. And that makes me feel like exactly the kind of man Sophia would have been ashamed to call her brother." The honesty was brutal and refreshing in equal measure. "And I hate that I'm starting to understand you," Clara admitted. "That part of me recognizes your pain even while I resent being used as a tool to inflict more pain. I want to despise you completely, but you keep showing these glimpses of humanity that make it complicated." "Complicated," Luca repeated. "That's one word for it." He left without another word, and Clara stood alone in her room, wondering what exactly she'd just set in motion. The truth between them was out now. No more pretending, no more performance. which meant whatever came next would be real, and that was somehow more terrifying than all the lies had been. The days following their confrontation moved differently. Luca didn't disappear into the East Wing or manufacture excuses to avoid her. Instead, Clara found him at breakfast most mornings, reading the financial news on his tablet while drinking coffee he'd made himself. They didn't talk much at first, just shared the space in a silence that was less hostile than what had come before. On the third morning, Luca set down his tablet and said, "Your father showed up at my office again yesterday." Clara's hand stilled on her coffee cup. And I had security escort him out, same as always. Luca's expression was unreadable. "But he left you a letter. Asked them to make sure you received it." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and slid it across the table. Clara stared at it like it might explode. "You didn't open it?" she asked. "It's addressed to you, not me." Luca stood, collecting his things. "What you do with it is your choice." He left her alone with the envelope. Clara picked it up, feeling the weight of her father's words before she'd even read them. Part of her wanted to throw it away unopened. He'd forfeited the right to communicate with her when he'd sold her to settle his debts. But another part, the part that remembered being 12 years old and watching him read her bedtime stories, needed to know what he had to say. She opened the envelope. The letter was handwritten, her father's familiar scrawl covering both sides of the paper. Clara read it twice, her emotions shifting from anger to grief to something she couldn't quite name. He'd written about the building, about the choices he and Chen had made, about knowing the electrical work wasn't up to code but convincing himself it would be fine, that buildings cut corners all the time and nothing bad ever happened. He'd written about the night of the fire, watching the news coverage and realizing his negligence had killed people, about the settlements he'd paid to make the lawsuits go away, about living with guilt that ate at him every single day. And then he'd written about her, about watching her marry Luca Moretti and understanding exactly what it meant, that his daughter was paying the price for his sins, that Luca had found the one punishment that would actually hurt, not financial ruin or professional disgrace, but seeing Clara trapped in a marriage that was really a prison. The letter ended with an apology Clara wasn't sure she could accept and a promise she wasn't sure he could keep. "I'm going to make this right. I don't know how yet, but I will find a way. You don't deserve to suffer for my mistakes." Clara folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket. She sat at the breakfast table for a long time, watching sunlight move across the expensive hardwood floors, trying to reconcile the father who'd read her bedtime stories with the man who'd cut corners on a building that killed 23 people, trying to reconcile her anger at being sold with the understanding that he'd been trapped between impossible choices. She found Luca in his office, not the locked one in the East Wing, but a smaller workspace he used for everyday business. He looked up when she knocked, and something in his expression suggested he'd been waiting for this conversation. "He admitted it," Clara said, "in the letter. Everything about the building, the corners they cut, knowing it wasn't safe." "I know what he did." Luca's voice was careful. "I've known for 3 years. He says he's going to make it right, whatever that means. There is no making it right. Sophia's dead. 22 other people are dead. No amount of apologies or belated guilt changes that." Clara moved into the office and sat in the chair across from his desk. "You're right. It doesn't change anything. But Luca, neither does this. Using me to torture him, destroying his business piece by piece. It doesn't bring Sophia back. It doesn't make the pain less. It just creates more suffering." "That's the point." But Luca didn't sound as certain as he had before. "Is it? Or is the point that as long as you're focused on revenge, you don't have to actually deal with your grief?" Luca's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I think I do. I think you've been running from your sister's death for 3 years, channeling all that pain into destroying the people responsible instead of actually processing it. And now you're stuck. Because if you let go of the revenge, what do you have left?" "Nothing." The word came out raw, honest. "I have nothing left without this. You have yourself, your life, the possibility of actually healing instead of just surviving on rage." Luca stood abruptly and moved to the window, his back to Clara. "You make it sound simple, like I can just decide to forgive and move on. But every time I close my eyes, I see her. Every time I walk past her room, I remember what she was supposed to become. The building she would have designed, the life she would have lived, and I can't just let that go. Clara stood and moved to stand beside him. I'm not asking you to let it go. I'm asking you to acknowledge that revenge isn't the same as justice, and that using me to punish my father makes you complicit in the same kind of cruelty you're trying to avenge. So what do you want me to do? Just release you, pretend this marriage never happened, let your father off without any consequences? I want you to make a choice, Clara said, not out of rage or grief or some promise you made at a funeral, but out of who you actually want to be. The man Sophia would have been proud of, or the man you've become because you couldn't figure out how to live with loss. Luca turned to look at her, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. Not agreement, not yet, but consideration, like he was actually hearing her for the first time. I don't know how to be that man anymore, he admitted quietly. The one she would have been proud of. I've spent 3 years building this version of myself. I don't know what's left underneath. Then maybe it's time to find out. They stood there in the afternoon light, the silence between them heavy with possibility. Finally, Luca said, There's someone I need to see. Someone I've been avoiding because facing him means confronting something I'm not ready for. Your father? Clara guessed, remembering that both Luca and Sophia's parents had died. No. The man who tried to save Sophia. The firefighter who carried her out of the building. Luca's voice went rough. He's reached out a dozen times over the years, wants to talk. I've ignored every attempt because hearing the details of how she died, of how close she came to surviving, I couldn't handle it. And now? Now I think maybe I need to hear it, need to actually face what happened instead of just using it as fuel for revenge. Luca looked at Clara. Will you come with me? The request surprised her. Why? Because you're right. I've been running from this for 3 years, and I don't think I can stop running alone. The honesty in his voice made something crack open in Clara's chest. This was the real Luca, not the cold businessman or the calculating husband, just a man who'd lost someone he loved and didn't know how to survive it. Okay, she said. I'll come with you. They drove into the city 2 days later. Luca had called ahead, arranging to meet the firefighter, a man named David Hernandez, at a coffee shop in Brooklyn. Clara watched Luca's hands tighten on the steering wheel as they got closer, saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. We can turn around, she offered, if you're not ready. I'll never be ready. That's the problem. Luca pulled into a parking spot and killed the engine. But I need to do this anyway. The coffee shop was small, local, the kind of place that served actual good coffee instead of just expensive coffee. David Hernandez was already there, sitting at a corner table. He stood when they entered, a man in his 50s with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much tragedy. Luca. David's voice was gentle. Thank you for finally agreeing to meet. They shook hands, and Luca introduced Clara simply as his wife. David ordered them coffee, and they settled into an uncomfortable silence that Clara finally broke. You were there, she said. The night of the fire. I was. David looked at Luca. I've wanted to tell you what happened for 3 years, but I understand why you couldn't hear it. I can hear it now, Luca said, though his voice suggested otherwise. Tell me. David took a breath. We got the call at 11:47 p.m., structure fire, residential building, multiple people trapped. We arrived 6 minutes later. The building was already engulfed. The fire had spread faster than it should have because of the faulty wiring in the walls. And the exits, he paused. The exits were blocked. Storage in the stairwells, security gates that weren't up to code. Every safety violation you can imagine. Luca's hands clenched on the table. Clara reached over and covered one with her own. He didn't pull away. We went in anyway, David continued. Got most people out of the lower floors, but the 8th floor, the smoke was too thick. The structure was compromised. My captain called us back, said it wasn't safe, but I could hear someone up there, a woman, calling for help. Sophia, Luca said. I didn't know her name then, just knew someone was alive and needed help. So I went back in. Found her in her apartment. She was conscious, scared but coherent. I got her to the window, started to bring her down the ladder. David's voice cracked. We almost made it. We were 3 floors from the ground when part of the building collapsed. The vibration threw us. She fell. Luca made a sound like he'd been punched. Clara tightened her grip on his hand. I tried to catch her, David said, tears streaming down his face now. I swear I tried. But she was already unconscious from the smoke. The fall. It was quick. The medical examiner said she wouldn't have felt anything. That's supposed to make it better? Luca's voice was barely controlled. No, nothing makes it better. But I've lived with that night for 3 years, replayed it 1,000 times, wondered what I could have done differently, and I needed you to know that she fought, that she didn't give up, and that in her last conscious moments, she knew someone was trying to save her. The coffee shop had gone quiet around them. Clara realized she was crying. Luca was staring at David like he was trying to reconcile this story with the version he'd built in his head. Why did you want to tell me this? Luca finally asked. Because I've seen what happens to the families left behind. Some of them heal, find ways to move forward. Others get stuck in the grief. Let it consume them. Turn them into people their loved ones wouldn't recognize. David met Luca's eyes. Your sister died trying to live. She didn't die so you could destroy yourself seeking revenge. She deserved better than that. And so do you. Luca stood abruptly. I need air. He walked out of the coffee shop, and Clara started to follow, but David caught her arm gently. Give him a minute, he said. This is the conversation he's been avoiding for 3 years. He needs to process it. Clara sat back down. How do you do it? Live with something like that? Therapy. A lot of therapy. And the understanding that I did everything I could. That sometimes tragedy happens despite our best efforts. And that carrying guilt for things outside our control doesn't honor the people we lost. It just creates more suffering. He blames my father, Clara said, for cutting corners on the building, creating the conditions that killed her. And he's not wrong to assign responsibility, but there's a difference between holding someone accountable and letting that need for accountability destroy you. Luca crossed that line somewhere along the way. Clara looked out the window to where Luca stood on the sidewalk, his shoulders shaking. I don't know if he can find his way back. That's why he brought you, David said, because some part of him knows he needs help, that he can't do this alone. Clara found Luca leaning against the car, his face wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. She stood beside him without speaking, just present. I blamed him, Luca said finally. David, for not saving her. For 3 years I blamed him almost as much as I blamed your father, because if he'd just held on tighter, if he'd been faster, He broke off. But hearing him tell it, seeing his face, he tried. He risked his life trying to save someone he didn't even know, and I've spent 3 years hating him for failing. Grief isn't rational, Claire said gently. You needed someone to blame. David, my father, me, anyone except the randomness of tragedy. What if I can't let it go? The need for someone to pay? Then you'll stay stuck, and Sophia will have died for nothing because instead of living the life she would have wanted you to live, you destroyed yourself in her name. Luca turned to look at her, really look at her. When did you get so wise? When I got trapped in a marriage with a man who forced me to learn how to survive impossible situations. The comment might have been bitter. Instead, it came out almost fond. Claire was surprised to realize she meant it that way. They drove home in silence. That evening, Luca didn't retreat to the East Wing. Instead, he found Clara in the library and sat in the chair across from her. I want to show you something, he said. He led her to Sophia's room, the shrine he'd maintained for 3 years. But instead of just standing there in the doorway the way he usually did, Luca walked inside and started opening drawers. These are her things, he said, pulling out sketchbooks and folders. Her designs. The buildings she wanted to create. I've kept them locked away because looking at them hurt too much. But maybe it's time to actually do something with them. Like what? There's a community center project she was working on, the one she told me about the night before she died. I have all her preliminary designs. The neighborhood still needs the center. What if I actually built it? Used her vision to create something that would last, that would help people? Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She would love that. It won't bring her back, won't erase what your father did, but maybe it's a better memorial than revenge, building something instead of destroying everything. They spent the next hour going through Sophia's designs. Clara watched Luca's face transform as he talked about his sister's vision. This was the man he could have been if grief hadn't twisted him into something else. This was who Sophia would have wanted him to be. "What about my father?" Clara asked finally. "If you're letting go of the revenge, what happens to him?" Luca was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Part of me still wants him to suffer, to understand what he took from the world when he cut those corners. But destroying him won't build Sophia's community center. It won't help the neighborhood she wanted to serve." "So you just forgive him?" "No, I don't think I can do that, but maybe I can stop actively destroying him. Let him live with his guilt. That's punishment enough." "And me?" Claire's voice came out smaller than she intended. "What happens to me in all this?" Luca set down the sketchbook he'd been holding and turned to face her fully. "That's your choice, Clara. This marriage, it started as a weapon, a tool for revenge. But if I'm letting go of the revenge, then you're free. I'll have the lawyers draw up divorce papers, give you a settlement, whatever you need to rebuild the life I took from you." The offer should have brought relief, freedom, everything Clara had wanted since the moment she'd realized she was the bride at that cathedral wedding. Instead, she felt something complicated and confusing. "What if I don't want a divorce?" The words came out before she could stop them. Luca looked stunned. "What?" "I don't know," Clara said, trying to understand her own feelings. "A month ago, you were my jailer, the man who'd bought me like property. But somewhere along the way, that changed. You changed. Or maybe I just finally saw past the performance to who you actually are underneath. Clara, you don't owe me anything. This marriage was forced on you. You have every right to walk away." "I know, but what if I don't want to? What if I want to see who we could be if we actually chose this? Not out of revenge or obligation, but because we want to try." Luca stared at her like she'd suggested something impossible. "You can't possibly want to stay married to me after everything I've done, everything I've put you through." "You're right. I shouldn't want that. It would be easier to just leave, start over somewhere far away from this complicated mess." Clara moved closer to him. "But I've spent the last month learning how to read you, how to see past the walls you build. And underneath all the pain and revenge, there's a man I think I could actually care about, if he'd let me." "I don't deserve that kind of forgiveness." "Maybe not. But Sophia would want you to have it anyway. She'd want you to be happy, to build a life instead of just surviving on rage." Luca's carefully maintained control finally cracked. He reached for Clara, pulling her into an embrace that felt nothing like the calculated touches he'd used before. This was real, desperate, the grip of a drowning man who'd just been offered a lifeline. "I don't know how to do this," he said against her hair. "How to be a real husband instead of a captor. How to build something genuine with someone I hurt so badly." "Neither do I," Claire admitted. "But maybe we can figure it out together." They stood there in Sophia's room, holding each other while 3 years of grief and anger and pain finally started to drain away. It wasn't forgiveness. Not completely. There was too much history, too much hurt to simply erase. But it was the beginning of something new, something chosen instead of forced. The next morning, Luca called Vincent Valenti's office. Clara listened from the doorway as he spoke. "I'm done," Luca said. "The vendetta, the systematic destruction of your business, all of it. I'm done." Clara couldn't hear her father's response, but she saw Luca's expression shift. "Because your daughter asked me to be," Luca said, "and because I'm choosing to build something instead of destroying everything. You'll still have to live with what you did. That's not something I can or will forgive, but I won't actively ruin you anymore." He paused, listening. "She's fine, better than fine, and that's all you need to know." Luca's voice hardened. "You sold her to save yourself. Don't expect me to give you access to her now that I'm releasing my hold." He hung up and turned to find Clara watching. "Was that okay? I didn't ask if you wanted to speak to him." "I don't," Clara said honestly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. He's still my father, but what he did, to Sophia, to all those people, to me, I'm not ready to forgive that." "That's fair. More than fair." Over the following weeks, the house transformed. Luca started the process of building Sophia's community center, throwing himself into the project with the same intensity he'd once directed at revenge. Clara helped, using her eye for detail to refine the designs and her research skills to navigate the permitting process. They started having dinner together, real conversations instead of hostile silence. Luca told her about growing up with Sofia, about their parents' deaths, about learning to run a business empire while still practically a kid himself. Clara shared stories about her work authenticating art, about her mother leaving, about the moment she'd realized her father valued money more than integrity. Slowly, carefully, they built something real. Marco showed up one afternoon and found them working together on the community center plans. He pulled Luca aside, and Clara could hear their conversation from the next room. "You look different," Marco said. "Lighter, like you're actually living instead of just surviving." "Clara happened," Luca said simply. "She forced me to see that revenge wasn't healing anything, just creating more damage." "So you're actually trying to make this marriage work? For real?" "Yeah, I am." "And she wants that too? After everything you put her through?" "Apparently, I don't fully understand it either, but I'm not questioning it too hard in case she comes to her senses." Clara smiled from where she stood in the other room. She didn't fully understand it either, how she'd gone from hating Luca to actually caring about him, but she'd learned that the human heart was more complicated than logic allowed, that you could resent someone for the pain they caused, while also recognizing the pain that drove them to cause it. 6 months after the wedding, the community center broke ground. Luca insisted on a small ceremony, just family and a few key people from the neighborhood that would benefit from Sofia's vision. Clara stood beside him as the mayor gave a speech about public-private partnerships and community investment. When it was Luca's turn to speak, he stepped to the microphone with Clara's hand in his. "This building exists because of my sister, Sofia Moretti," he said. "She believed architecture could change lives, that good design wasn't a luxury but a necessity for thriving communities. She died before she could bring this vision to life. But today, we begin the work of building her dream." His voice caught, and Clara squeezed his hand. He looked at her and found the strength to continue. "For 3 years, I let grief consume me. Let it turn me into someone my sister wouldn't have recognized. But someone very wise reminded me that the best memorial to Sofia isn't revenge against the people responsible for her death. It's building the kind of world she wanted to create. This is the first step. It won't be the last." After the ceremony, they stood looking at the empty lot that would soon hold Sofia's community center. Luca put his arm around Clara and she leaned into him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing past what I'd become to who I could still be. For refusing to let me destroy myself completely. For staying when you had every reason to run." "Thank you for letting me," Clara said. "For choosing to build instead of destroy. For actually trying to be a real husband instead of just a captor." "We started in the worst possible way," Luca said. "A forced marriage, lies, revenge, everything wrong. And somehow we're finding our way to something right." Clara turned to face him. "It's not perfect. It's not the love story anyone would choose, but it's ours." Luca kissed her then. Not the performative kiss from their wedding or the careful kisses of early reconciliation. This was real, full of promise and possibility, and the understanding that they'd survived the worst and might actually build something beautiful from the ruins. A year later, Clara stood in an art gallery in Soho, her art gallery, the one Luca had helped her open, using his business connections and her expertise to create a space dedicated to emerging artists. The opening night was packed with collectors and artists and people who genuinely cared about art for its own sake, rather than just as investment. Luca appeared at her elbow with champagne. "You did it. This is amazing." "We did it," Clara corrected. "I couldn't have made this happen without your help. I just provided capital and connections. The vision was all yours." Clara looked around the gallery, at the carefully curated pieces, at the excited conversations happening in corners, at the world she'd built from the ashes of the life she'd lost. "Do you ever regret it? Letting go of the revenge? Choosing this instead?" Luca considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I still get angry, still think about your father and what he took from me. But then I think about Sofia's community center, about this gallery, about us. And I realize that the life I'm living now, the one where I actually build things and care about people and try to be better, it's what she would have wanted. The revenge kept me stuck. This lets me move forward. Do you think she'd forgive you for what you did to me in her name? I hope so. But more importantly, I'm learning to forgive myself, to accept that I was broken and made terrible choices because of it, and that I'm responsible for fixing what I broke. Clara took his hand. You're doing that every day. They were interrupted by someone wanting to discuss a painting, and Clara excused herself to make the sale. As she talked about brushwork and composition and the artist's vision, she felt the complete rightness of this moment. This was who she was supposed to be, not trapped in a marriage built on revenge, but choosing every day to build something real with a man who'd started as her enemy and become her partner. The gallery opening was a success. Clara sold 6 pieces and got interest from collectors who could launch the featured artists' careers. As the crowd thinned, Luca helped her close up, moving through the space with easy familiarity. I have something for you, he said as they prepared to leave. He pulled out a small velvet box, the same one he'd shown her that first week, the engagement ring she'd refused to wear. Before you say no, Luca said quickly, I know what this represented when I first tried to give it to you. Ownership, control, a collar dressed up as jewelry. But I'd like to offer it again. Not as a symbol of possession, but as a promise. That I choose this marriage every day. That you're not trapped here, but staying because you want to. Clara looked at the ring, still obscenely large, still probably worth more than most people made in a year. But seeing it now, she understood it differently. Not as a shackle, but as a symbol of how far they'd come. Yes, she said, I'll wear it, because I choose this too. Luca slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly. Then he kissed her, and Clara tasted salt from tears she wasn't sure belonged to her, or to him, or to both of them. They drove home through the city streets, past the construction site where Sophia's community center was taking shape, past the office building where Luca ran his empire with slightly more ethics than before, past all the markers of the life they were building together. The estate didn't feel like a prison anymore. The gates that had once kept Clara trapped now felt like protection. The beautiful rooms she'd rattled around in alone were now filled with art she'd chosen, and books they'd read together, and the accumulated evidence of a life shared. That night, Clara stood in what had become their bedroom. Not his, not hers, but theirs. Luca came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. I love you, he said. The first time he'd said the words without caveat or qualification. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was the moment you pushed back against me in the library. Maybe it was watching you refuse to break under pressure. Maybe it was hearing you tell me I could be better than what I'd become. But somewhere along the way, the woman I'd taken as a weapon became the person I can't imagine living without. Clara turned in his arms. I love you too. Even though loving you is complicated and messy and probably says something questionable about my judgment, I love the man you're becoming, the one who builds community centers and supports art galleries and actually tries to be good even when it's hard. We have a strange love story. The strangest, Clara agreed. We started with a forced marriage and threats and revenge. Most people would say there's no coming back from that. But we did. We did. They stood there in their bedroom, in their house, in the life they'd chosen despite everything that should have made it impossible. The beginning had been terrible, painful, built on lies and grief and all the wrong reasons. But they'd survived it. And in surviving, they'd built something real. Months turned into years. The community center opened a celebration from the neighborhood and praise from architectural critics who recognized Sophia's vision in every detail. Clara's gallery became a fixture in the art world, known for championing emerging artists and maintaining ethical practices in an industry often driven by money alone. Luca's business evolved, becoming more transparent, more focused on sustainable growth rather than just maximum profit. Vincent Valenti reached out occasionally, birthday cards, awkward phone calls where he asked how Clara was doing, and she gave him minimal information. The relationship remained fractured. Clara wasn't sure it would ever fully heal, but she'd made a fragile peace with the reality that her father was both the man who'd raised her and the man whose negligence had killed 23 people. People were complicated. Forgiveness was complicated. She was learning to live with the contradictions. On the third anniversary of their wedding, the day that had started with Clara thinking she was attending someone else's celebration, Luca woke her early and said he had something to show her. They drove to the community center, which had been open for over a year now. Inside, Luca led her to a quiet corner where a dedication plaque had been installed. Sofia Moretti Memorial Community Center, Clara read aloud. Built in honor of a woman who believed architecture could change lives and communities could heal. May her vision continue to inspire those who use this space to build better futures. Below that, a second plaque had been added, new, shining. This center stands as testament that from tragedy can come purpose, from grief can come growth, and from the darkest beginnings can emerge the brightest lights. Built with love by her brother Luca, with profound gratitude to Clara, who showed him how to build instead of destroy. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. "Luca, you saved me," he said simply. "When I was drowning in revenge and grief, you threw me a lifeline. This center exists because Sofia dreamed it, but it's real because you reminded me that I could honor her by building rather than destroying." Clara turned to him, this man who'd bought her like property and somehow become her partner in the truest sense. "We saved each other. I was drowning too, in a life that felt small and meaningless. You forced me to be stronger than I knew I could be, to fight for what I wanted, to build something real instead of just surviving." They stood in Sofia's community center, in the dream she'd never lived to see realized, and chose each other again, not because they had to, not because of obligation or revenge or any of the terrible reasons that had brought them together, but because they wanted to, because they'd learned that love built from ruins could be stronger than love that had never been tested. The marriage that had begun as a weapon had become a choice. The vows spoken under duress had been rewritten through years of actual partnership. And the woman who'd walked down that cathedral aisle believing she was attending someone else's wedding had found a life she never could have imagined. Clara Moretti stood with her husband in a community center built from tragedy and looked toward a future they were creating together. It wasn't the life she would have chosen if someone had offered her a menu of options. It was strange and complicated and built on a foundation that should have crumbled, but it was real, it was chosen, and it was theirs. And sometimes, Clara thought, the best love stories weren't the ones that started perfectly. They were the ones that survived despite everything, that transformed from weapons into choices, that proved people could change and grow and become better than what pain had made them. Their story had started in a cathedral with lies and forced vows. It continued in an art gallery and a community center and a home they'd made together. And it would keep going, Clara knew, for as long as they both chose it, every single day. The revenge had ended. The marriage remained, and for the first time since that impossible wedding day, both Clara and Luca were free. Not from each other, but because of each other. Free to build, free to love, free to create lives Sofia would have been proud of. That was the real justice, the real memorial, the real victory over tragedy. Not revenge, but choosing, every day, to build something beautiful from the ruins of what had been destroyed. Together.